sunny, no longer sunny summer evening. So welcome. In the case of emergency, you can exit the building out the rear of the room, either door, and then down the hallway in either direction to exits. Are there any suggested changes to the agenda? Okay, we will keep it as is. Does anyone have any announcements?
Before you get too far, can I just make a quick
Yes.
procedural announcement?
Yes,
So
please.
just so folks know, there are one city councilor here in person and two online. So that is a quorum of the council. Under the open meeting law, a body can be participating in another body's work as long as it is the work of that other body. So just an announcement that folks are here as folks attending the planning commission.
Very good. Welcome, city councilors. I'm pleased that you are here. Do you have a question about?
There's not, but when you, if you do speak, please announce your name and yeah, we'll record it as it comes.
And you can raise your hand when it's time and we'll.
Oh. Elizabeth Fitzgerald and Andrew Chalnick are online.
Okay. We are very excited to have Colin joining us tonight.
Yeah, hello, excited to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to say a few words or just introduce yourself just to the commission. I know that you're new. Did you do this while I was gone? Okay. Sorry, I might have missed a meeting.
No, good. Yeah. So hi, yeah, my name is Colin Lawrence. This is my first meeting on the commission. And yes, this background, yeah, I've been living on Bacon Street down by the Shaws on Shelburne Road for the last couple of years. And my background is in transportation engineering. I'm currently I work in doing a traffic modeling research project through the University of California. And it's also done some transit engineering before with in San Francisco. And yeah, so I'm kind of particularly interested in the transportation side of things on how that relates to planning, which is yeah, why I took interest in the commission in the first place. Yeah, that's me. Hi.
Welcome.
Welcome, Colin. And
do I have to push the talk on these every time? Is that how it works?
If
maybe.
the green light is on, then it's on. You don't have to hold it.
Okay.
But if you don't want to turn it off when you're not speaking, then the green light will be off.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, I see now.
Did folks hear Colin? Okay, great. Well, welcome. And you are fully on for discussion, comments, voting. Other announcements? Anyone have any? Any staff report today?
I think we'll just go straight to the items on the agenda. No staff report for tonight.
Okay. Has our public hearing been warned for 7? Okay, so we are going to move into our public hearing on the draft amendments to the land development regulations. And do we need a motion to open the hearing? I'm sorry. Okay, a second. Okay, we have a second from Paul. All in favor of opening the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we are unanimously into the public hearing. Paul and Kelsey, is there anything you would like to open with before we move to public comment?
Do you want to talk about the structure of how we'll take the meeting tonight?
Sure. So there's a lot in this packet. There's a lot of changes that were made. The general driver behind this is compliance with state statute. There were two acts that were passed, one in 2023 and one in 2024. They're very closely related. One is called S100 Act 47, or the Home Act. That was in 2023. This year in 2024, H687, or the Be Home Act of 2024. Those work very tightly together, and the 2024 version is a little bit of correction, a little bit of clarification, a little bit of extra on top of the 2023 version. We have structured the amendments in a more sort of reasonable set of chunks instead of just, every single red line, into 10 groups, really, 10 amendments that are then clustered into 3 groups. The first group is transportation. So that's LDR 2401 and 02. Those are related to EV charging and transportation demand management. Those are not directly related to the state statutes, but they are related to projects that we already had going on or development projects that felt logical to lump in with this group of amendments. The second cluster we've called Thriving Neighborhoods and the Home Act of 2023 / B Home Act of 2024 compliance. Those are 03 through 07, and they go up in scale, low scale, medium scale, and higher scale mixed use or higher scale areas, and then conservation related amendments. So that's both land use updates and changes to the transferable development rights system. And 07 is inclusionary zoning. South Burlington has had a citywide inclusionary zoning system, but the state adopted an optional program that just didn't mesh well. So we are proposing changes to the city's version of inclusionary zoning so that it matches up with the state and we don't have kind of mismatched systems that developers have to comply with both. The third category is a general streamlining of LDR process and standards and additional minor and technical amendments. So that's Amendment 8, 9, and 10. Those are things that have come up primarily in the process of doing all of the other work. 08 is primarily an overhaul of Article 15, which includes Article 15A, Article 15B, and Article 15C, which are all related to subdivision and master plan. 09 is streamlining additional things in the table of uses and further consolidation of districts. If you read through the spotlights or the full set of amendments, the 3 through 7, 3 through 5 really also contain consolidation of districts. So we took this opportunity to consolidate from the many zoning districts that we had to a lower number of logical districts. So 09 is also related to that, but in a commercial context in airport and airport industrial. And 10 is then just minor and technical amendments, things that we found as we were going through, small wording changes, punctuation changes, numbering, formatting, things like that. So I don't know if if it makes sense to the commission to kind of go in approximately this order. And then if, logically people would be able to stand up more than once if you have comments on more than one of these sections, but feels like maybe having the public comment clustered would make some sense and keep everything streamlined for the commission.
Is that acceptable to commissioners to take comments kind of in these chunks as laid out in the, okay. Yeah, okay.
And
So-
then just to lay out for anybody who's new, you will hold the public hearing. That is everybody's opportunity to give their feedback to you or ask a clarifying question. After the close of the public hearing is when you'll have your discussion and talk about any additional amendments recommended by staff or legal counsel. So just to sort of lay all that out.
And if there are any factual wording, clarification of what language says, questions that are purely that sort of factual question, then staff is very happy to answer any of those questions from the public. If you venture into sort of legal interpretation, that's another matter, but.
Okay.
I think we did that at the last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in general, if you have questions or comments related to the transportation related items, those were the first 2 on that agenda. If you have comments or questions on them, it would be a great time to raise your hand and we can call on you, and then you could come up to the podium to give your comment, or if you're online, we can recognize you and you can unmute.
And also in the room, both the podium mic and the mic at this table are connected. You might have to turn it on to see the green light, but whichever people are comfortable with, if you'd like to sit or stand, that's up to you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Would anyone like to offer any feedback on the transportation items?
I have a couple of pieces that were submitted in writing. Do you want to see those after or just by topic?
Maybe by or well, maybe we can pass them out now.
Okay.
Mm.
So here's one set regarding EV charging,
Okay.
and we can talk about it after. Yes, that is.
Yeah, and this is related to transportation, so this makes sense to have now. And this,
And you can review it in more detail in a little bit, but this was received today by the EV Charging for All Coalition, submitted to staff, sent to you by email earlier today. They outline 4 recommendations for going essentially further with your add-on to the state residential and commercial energy code
okay,
in the EV charging component. So
great.
that's my 1 sentence summary.
Okay, and then also in our packet that we received, we did get 2 written comments. One of which, the one from Keith Epstein is directly related to this transportation item. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we received that one, as well as one from Sandy Dooley that's a little more related to kind of the next topic of housing. So those are in our packet already. We've seen those.
And I'm passing out a second one that is not transportation based. It is this is in the new
Was it in-
C1LR district. So when you get to that, I'll note what that is.
Okay,
If I downloaded this a few days ago, were these
These are brand new. These are,
the ones that were in the packet? They were- Been in the packet?
if they were in the packet, they're in the packet. If they were just handed out tonight, we've got them today.
okay. Okay, I'm not hearing any specific comments about transportation other than the ones we received in writing. So we can move on to comments related to category we're calling Thriving Neighborhoods and Home Act of 2023 / Be Home Act of 2024 compliance. And there's quite a few changes in here. You can see the list of general categories and changes up on the screen and on the agenda under this item. Do we have any public comment or questions? Sandy, do you want to come up?
That's not the same. That's what that means.
Okay. Thank you.
Ah, got it.
Just a reminder, Sandy, when you're settled, if you could state your name.
I was going to, thank you. My name is Sandy Dooley. I've lived in the city over 50 years. And I just want to start by congratulating and thanking all of you.
Is your light on?
It is.
Yes, it is. Are you not hearing me? I just think this is a watershed moment in the history of land development regulations, especially with regard to things like going from how many residential zoning districts, 25 maybe, to I think 4. Anyway, and lots of other things. I'm proud to be a resident of South Burlington when I look at these. I think you're establishing a gold standard for cities of this size in these areas. So I'm not an expert, but that's my view. With regard to the inclusionary zoning changes, there was one change which I'm focusing on, and that is the bonus for constructing more than the required amount. And I see this as a major departure from what the current rules are. And I've provided a couple of examples on what I gave you. I been involved in the development of our inclusionary zoning rules from the beginning. And these, the current bonus, the intent of it is to provide an incentive to developers of market rate housing to go beyond the minimum. The people that develop affordable housing, they specialize in it. They do not need inclusionary zoning at all because their funding sources require high levels, high percentages, more than the double standard in here of affordable or inclusionary units. So this was developed to try to get market rate developers to do a little more and give them a reward and result in more mixed income units in housing developments, which I believe is the city's desire. First example is under the current rules, 60 rental units on a 5-acre lot, R12 zoning. They're required to have 9 inclusionary units. They get 9 market rate units. Those 9 are part of the 60. So that's a result of 69 units. That's our current rules is this is rental development, 15% are inclusionary. So the developer adds 7 units to the 9 required. So now we have 16 and they get an additional 7 units. They get for every 1 additional unit, they get 1 additional market rate unit. And so we end up with 16 inclusionary units and a total of 76 units in the development and 21% are inclusionary. Under the current rules, I don't really know what the proposed purpose in the proposed rules, because I haven't seen anything that explains what I would consider a very high bar to get a bonus. So we have the 60 units on a 5-acre lot, rental units. With the 20% requirement, the minimum, they're required to do 12 inclusionary units. And the offset for that should be 12 inclusionary units is an authorization to build an extra floor above the 5-story maximum, which I'm fine with that. The total units then is 60 units, but they do get an extra floor within which to build them. If they choose to add 7 inclusionary units to the 12 required, they get no bonus whatsoever. Even though with 19 inclusionary units, they are 32% of their units are inclusionary compared to our current policy in which 21% are inclusionary and they get 16 extra units. So I just see this as your proposal is that in order to get the bonus of an additional floor, you have to do double. You have to do 40% of your development. That is a dramatic change. I don't know. That's a tremendous stretch for the private for-profit market developer to do on a voluntary basis. And I really question whether it'll be used at all. As I said, it'll automatically, virtually, I can't think of an affordable housing organization that won't meet the 40% standard. They wouldn't get the money they need to develop the housing development if they did. So my proposal is to reduce that standard. I would suggest even this, I think, is high, but anyway, say 1/3. Say instead of having to do 24 in this example, have them have to do 16, 4 additional ones for the additional floor. We might get some developers that would do that. I don't think we'll get them for 12, an additional 12. So that's my concern with that. My other concern relates to Article 15. So I'll wait until that part of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Any other comments on this section of the changes? Would it,
This is the section that has anything to do with the consolidation of zoning districts, about dimensional standards in the low scale or the middle scale or the mixed use districts, anything to do with the inclusionary zoning or the TDRs or the conservation land use updates. So it's a pretty big category of anything that basically has to do with housing. So if somebody's got,
do you want to come up or either location?
I'll just go ahead and introduce myself again as well. My name is Heather Soren. This is my mother, Donna. Little.
I apologize, but could you speak into a microphone because the people online can't
I'm
hear?
sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry. I needed.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Just wanted to be support here. but I
Yes,
appreciate
you-
it. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing the chair over. We should have two
Um,
there.
Yes, so my name is Heather Soren. And this is my mother, Donna Little. We are co-founders and owners of Happy Tales Pet Resort and Spa in South Burlington. Our address is 1045 Heinsberg Road. Good evening, everyone. So we may be coming a bit late to the table because we're pretty busy people. But we have some questions about the zoning changes that are going to or being proposed that are happening in our where we currently are located. And I'm going to turn this part over to Donna right now. And she can talk further about that and I'll just jump in. I'm sorry,
it's okay.
cannot hear us.
My name is Donna Little. Heather and I own Happy Tales Pet Resort and Spa. And we have concerns and questions about the zoning changes for our property. I think the very first question that we have is that in 2016, when we built our, when we purchased our property and built our building, we purchased as a commercial property, which was then zoned commercial open space. And built our, open, what was it?
Industrial.
Industrial open space zoning. Since then, it was zoned as R7-ND, and now they're proposed for a medium scale neighborhood. My first question is, we understand that we will be considered a non-conforming existing use. What happens in the future to our property if it ever happens to not become a pet care facility? And is that the extent of the use of that building?
If we decide to sell in the future to someone, we're concerned about what businesses will be allowed in there. And, we have an exit plan and we'd like to know how that's going to affect us in the future.
Yeah, thank you for coming tonight. I think this might fall into the technical answer category. The Kelsey and Paul wonderfully volunteered to help us answer so that we don't misspeak as lay people.
Sure. So I'll start at Paul Connor, Planning Zoning Director. At a high level, as you were stating, any use that is not allowed in a district but that already exists would become a pre-existing nonconformity. A pre-existing nonconformity means that you, as long as the business or a replacement business doing the same thing exists, you can continue indefinitely. So that's part one of your question. There's nothing, if the city chooses to change the regulations, it does not affect your present building and use in it.
As long as that person or whomever has it uses it.
As long as the
same.
use remains the same. So it could be you doing with Happy Tales, or if you decide to have it to, Joyful Ears Cat Place, that would be the same use. As long as the use is the same, then it can continue indefinitely.
Okay.
In terms of changing uses, if, let's say, you decide to sell the business to some other entity that wanted to do something that was not the type of business that you are, then it would revert to the allowed uses in that district. So that's what, as a nonconformity, anything that is allowed in that district at the time that that takes place is what would be allowed. So that's
So- I'm sorry. So we went into this property as a commercial property and now it's being rezoned to a residential. And I'm not seeing this as a fair and just to us that any future use of the building can only be any of these very few residential uses. The building is not even conducive to residential. It's a commercial building.
Just to clarify, make sure we're on the same page, is it, are they in the location where it would be medium scale neighborhood? I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah, I
they-
just double check
yeah.
on the map. And this is the table of uses, which is absurdly small in font. So let me see if I can make that any bigger.
Yeah, and do you know which column?
Yep, I'm just gonna scroll up.
Let's go, meetings.
That's not what I meant to do at all.
And
It's the third column.
okay, so the
Yeah.
third column on the list, so as you suggested, a lot of residential uses.
It's all residential.
So there's a lot of Ps, which is permitted in the third column over in other uses as well.
Commercial,
What line, what?
artist production studio, bed and breakfast,
But now you're in the commercial section.
childcare. Mhm.
So you are allowed to do any of the things in the commercial that is listed as a P as permitted. It's a residential district, but MSN is right here. And this into this column, recognizing it's not too many, but there are uses that are listed in the MSN that are not residential uses.
Like what? So you're s-
Childcare facility
No,
is
we don't
not,
have enough parking there. We're not even, we have 14 parking spaces.
So what you're saying is that in column 3, anything that has a P all the way down through the public
yes.
and the commercial
So
would
per-
be a permitted
is
use on
allowed.
the
Permitted use.
property.
Yep,
Yeah.
so if you look further down, limited neighborhood commercial, which is a new use, or it's an adapted use that's been added, would be allowed, which is small retail, small restaurant, things that serve the surrounding neighborhood in sort of scale and type. Personal instruction facility, personal or business service, recreational facility, indoor.
Conditional.
Conditional is out for outdoor. That means in the transit overlay, which this is not.
Any on this page right here?
So it is true that you're being moved out of kind of an industrial zone, because so some of those kind of more industrial, very larger uses.
So they're actually not.
Oh, is that-
No, that was what it had when they
Way back.
purchased. Yeah.
Originally, so in
The
her-
current zoning there is R7 NC,
Neighborhood
which is
commercial.
residential 7 neighborhood commercial, which I can bring up the current table if that's helpful.
One of the things that we're excited about in this round is the limited neighborhood commercial new category, which the idea is that it's kind of a smaller type of business, but there could be many different types of businesses there. So, sounds like your property might fall into that category because it's not a giant building.
We're just we're just over 1 acre.
And
The
It's 10,000.
parcel size. What's the square footage of your building?
10,000. But the way it's built now would never facilitate any kind of residential use.
Hmm.
So I know that I was not aware of the fact that anything in column 3 extends all the way down through
Inland.
the public and into the commercial uses.
Yes.
Okay, okay. My next and hopefully last question, how does this affect the large acreage property just to our north, which I believe is under consideration for a business park owned by J.L. Davis? Is he going to, because his property is also being rezoned to this neighborhood?
That's 855 Heinsberg.
835, yes.
and the zoning would be
It would be MSN. It's the same zoning.
MSN.
And they are currently the same zoning as you. So it's you're both being shifted in the same way.
As well as Mr. Senecal's property behind us and beside us.
Yep. Anything that was R7 NC is part of MSN now. So south of you is low scale neighborhood.
So at a high level, large properties currently in the district that you're discussing have the uses from the underlying district and are required to be a traditional neighborhood development, which is largely residential with a allowance for 5 to 15% of the property to be complementary commercial uses. In the draft, the underlying district changes to medium scale neighborhood, which is similar but not exactly the same as we just went through. An item for your discussion later this evening is how you want to deal with the planned unit development types, the traditional neighborhood, whether to continue to have them be mandatory or whether they should be optional above a certain land. Functionally, it is principally a sort of adjustments to the design difference rather than a change of the scale or of the uses really. So that's your discussion for later, but it is principally residential both today and in the future with an allowance for some level of complementary commercial uses.
Okay,
Thank you for coming in. Hopefully that answered your questions.
It did, but doesn't make us very happy.
just doesn't, not what we intended.
I mean, really, you're kind of, this whole
It-
plan
it
is-
limits-
it
it
limits
limits
our,
a-
it limits our future.
Huge use of the property. So,
Thank you.
Okay, do we have additional questions related to this section?
Can you hear me?
There's somebody online who'd like to speak.
Um,
I'll wait.
okay, who was it online that had their hand up?
It was Ryan, I believe.
Okay, Ryan, and then we'll go to the person in the room, try to go back and forth if possible.
Yes, thanks. Ryan Doyle, Woodside Drive. That was a really interesting comment from the last speakers.
Ryan, do you want to hold on a second? We're gonna raise the volume so we can make sure to all
Sure.
hear you. Okay, try again. See if,
Can you hear me okay now?
yes.
It was interesting hearing the last speakers because I thought we were moving toward a map that included more diversity of use and higher intensity use, especially along heavily traveled routes like Heinsberg Road, which is a state route, and isn't very far from city center. And so I'm actually a little perplexed that it seems to have shifted back to include fewer uses. It does, I think their concern is pretty valid, and I wonder how that can be reconciled this late in the process to enable that lot to not be so limited in uses given its location. Could you hear that?
Yes, we heard that. Yes.
So it looked like a lot of ears were straining there, so I couldn't
No,
tell.
no, you're making notes.
Joyce, that table that we were just looking at with all the proposed uses in each district, where can I find the version that's the current version of the existing?
I can send that to you.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you. I'd be just curious to see what changes are actually being proposed here.
Yeah, the trick is because there's been a pretty significant consolidation of districts.
Mhm.
What I would recommend you look at is what districts have been consolidated and then what those districts previously allowed or didn't allow. Because when they're consolidated, they definitionally had to kind of make some compromise here and there about what was or wasn't allowed in the different districts that were consolidated together. So I can send you that
Okay,
information.
thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Sure. Go ahead.
My turn. I'm Clifford Thorpe. I'm married to Donna Little. So I've had a great deal of interest in Happy Tales as it goes along too. So first question I have is this lady back here mentioned was talking about the sizes of these buildings and how contractors can adjust to that. Is there any adjustment available to Happy Tales for size? In other words, if there's an expansion of the building, will the pre-existing conditional use be able to be expanded out, or are they locked in to only that 1 acre that they own? Because a large appears to me that if somebody's going to build something large, 1 acre is going to be an inadequate amount of space for it. Can the building go up and can it go out and still be conforming, non-conforming, available use?
So I'll try to answer it technically. So I think you've got two questions in here, so please feel free to correct me. The use is as drafted becoming non-conforming. The building itself as a physical building is, and so far as I know, conforming. And so the building, setting aside the use for a minute, can be expanded to the maximum allowed in the regulations. So whatever the number of stories is, the total lot coverage, that is not, we can go through what those numbers are if you'd like. The use of the animal care facility that's there today, that I believe our nonconformities do not allow for physical expansions of a nonconforming use. So the building can be expanded. Let's say it has personal instruction studio, which is one of the allowed uses in there. And that personal instruction studio, or the two of them wanted to add space, then they certainly could. Or if the current building was going to remain Happy Tales, but they decide to make an addition to also add a personal instruction studio as an addition, that would be allowed. The Happy Tales or a similar business in the future cannot take up more space than present when it's a nonconformity. Does that answer your question?
It did, both of them.
Okay.
Thank you.
It could actually add a happy dogs cafe too, because the whole point, I think, and
Right,
nobody really mentioned this, but a lot of this, because it's associated with the neighborhood, the idea is to, not introduce a lot of traffic and parking, that they're uses that are conforming with the residential neighborhood. And, I think a doggy daycare certainly is a conforming, maybe that's something that could be considered. The noise is the issue, but it is a conforming use with the neighborhood.
Well, just to be technical about it, it
Yeah,
is a non-conforming
technically
use.
the
What
norm,
you're
yes.
saying is that is potentially complementary.
Right.
But from just to be 100% clear in a public hearing, as proposed, it would become
It
non-conforming
is
legally.
non-conforming
Okay,
legally.
Just
yes.
to
Yeah,
clear
but-
on words.
But yeah, just, the idea of trying to determine what uses are complementary to neighborhoods. So if anybody has any suggestions as to other complementary uses, we certainly could consider that.
The other questions that I had, I believe, just the definition of a medium scale residential is obviously in your latest plans. I should be able to read that there. Is that correct?
Sorry, what was your question?
The definition of medium scale residential.
Yes,
That's- Okay,
that would be in Article 4 or 5,
Sorry, when you say definition, what do you mean? Just so we're
like the
clear.
description
what,
of that.
defining what it means.
So what it means
that
in
is.
Article 5, what kinds of residential uses
That's
would
correct.
be in the appendix.
Appendix
So
B.
Yeah.
it'll say the types of, multifamily up to X number of units in a building, and the dimensional standards.
And the last question, apparently this process usurps Act 250, is that correct?
No, and so Act 250 is a state level regulation.
Yep.
Municipal zoning is municipal zoning. Under the acts passed in the last couple of years by the legislature, there are certain circumstances where if municipal regulations are in place for certain meet certain criteria, or if they are located in areas served by water and sewer and things like that, Act 250 is for certain types of priority housing projects removed. So that's not our regulations usurping or superseding, but there are conditions in what the legislature passed last year that said in certain circumstances, let's say in our city center area, for example, if the city has a certain designation, then Act 250 is not applicable for priority housing projects.
So I apologize for this question then. So the changes that you've made in the plan about all of these small districts becoming larger districts, that doesn't require Act 250?
It does not directly affect Act 250 one way or the other. As I said a minute ago, in what was passed in the legislature over the last couple of years, the legislature has taken steps to incentivize certain kinds of what they call priority housing, affordable housing. So in certain circumstances around the city and around the state, a project that meets that has a certain number of affordable dwelling units in it and things like that don't have to go through Act 250, but that is unrelated to our regulations. What the legislature also did was set new minimums for what municipalities have to do in their local zoning. It was in the same bill as the Act 250 bill, but it's two different areas.
And to answer a slightly different question, because I think I heard your question a little bit differently than Paul did. A municipality changing their zoning districts does not require Act 250 review by the state.
Okay. Thank you. How do you turn the green light off? Push.
Push it again.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, come on back up.
Hi, Heather Soren again. I'd like to just go back to the question that the gentleman had that was on the Zoom, that he's, said that we had some valid points and what can be done at this time. And, you asked us to come, sorry?
No, go ahead.
But nobody had an answer. We just
Um,
skipped right over the answer.
So typically, so we might not have been clear about how this process works. So typically, we are really absorbing and listening. And then after we hear all of the comments, we'll have an additional discussion up here about like potential changes that we want to incorporate into the draft. So we're not necessarily as a group responding to each comment as we're hearing it. That might be a frustrating part of our process. I understand. Paul?
Can we invite them to go through the list of permitted uses and suggest some uses that they would want to see for their property that we haven't considered?
Yeah, I think that could be good. So it is always helpful for us to hear like specific suggestions. So I know that your
Donna, my mother.
mom, I know, I just wanted to
Okay.
say mom, suggested that she hadn't realized that the Ps in the lower columns also were acceptable. So I mean, we're going to be here taking comments for a little while, so I don't know if you want to like look at that list and maybe make some suggestions of things you really hoped would be allowed for your property in the future, is what Paul's suggesting. Like if we had specifics, we could.
Is that something we could present to at another time rather than being on the spot tonight?
Can I just add one factual clarification? The consolidated, the R7NC, that is the current zoning district, and the MSN district, that is the proposed zoning district, has 3 changes. The things that are currently permitted that would not be permitted. One is office general, another is pet grooming, and the third is financial institutions. There's a few other things that actually went the other way, that went from a conditional use to a permitted use. But those are the 3 that have gone away. So those are the only 3 changes between what is currently allowed and what is proposed in the new district.
But we actually have a grooming salon, so we're still grandfathered in.
Correct.
Okay.
So
All right. So to answer my question, would it be unreasonable for Donna and I to come up with a list and email that list to you? Or is it, we're probably coming to the table too late. Okay, we're busy. We don't always have time to see and hear these meetings and what's going on, and there's so many changes. But clearly we're affected by this a great deal. And even the fact that we are, you know, you told us we are permitted for more uses than what we thought we were. Those are still not a huge amount of choices. It's a lot of bed and breakfasts and childcare and type businesses. There was a lumber yard that was actually going to go in there before us.
Yeah. So I think I don't know how the rest of the meeting tonight is going to go. We do have the option to make changes and then pass on our recommendations to city council. So I don't know that we can say right this second if we're going to talk about this at an additional meeting. Before anything would be official, the city council would also need to have multiple like another round of public hearings. So it wouldn't go into law tonight by any means, but it might be at the city council level before you would come back with additional comments. I think what Kelsey just said is helpful to me and maybe helpful to you, that the kind of 3 changes from what's in allowance now to what the changes are the 3 things of office general, pet grooming, and financial, which is hopefully maybe less of a change than you had anticipated coming into the meeting. But I think the answer is yes. If you come back with additional comments, whether it's with us or with city council, I think there will be, the group will listen to your comments, and so.
All right, thank you.
Options.
Hi. I actually have Emily Krasnow. I have a clarifying question after listening. What kind of outreach was done to businesses or other people that would be affected by the changes from your committee or the council or the city?
This is part of the outreach.
Tonight,
That's
Yeah.
so, okay, so no one contacted, like, again, I have compassion for business owners or other people who are very busy. We want to be a welcoming city to business owners. It's not an easy time to have a small business. So often folks are really busy as mentioned and don't have the capacity or time to focus on these things. So that's why I was asking if before this meeting, public forum, if there was any sort of outreach to people who would be affected by the changes. What if they didn't notice that, right? And then there's one meeting where everything's going to be decided.
So this is our fourth
Okay,
public
so you've
hearing.
had 4 public hearings.
I
then.
guess the other 3 we technically called a listening session where we
Okay.
were taking comments. So this is the 4th we're calling a hearing because it's maybe a little more official. Other paper, front page forum, front porch forum, postings. I think there's been, and we've been talking about this for almost a year. At our regularly scheduled meetings, which get posted. I mean, we try. It is true we didn't do direct mailings to every person in the city. But you know, we're trying through these public postings, the city newsletter to get the word out.
Okay, thank you. It wasn't a criticism. It was just a curiosity.
Yeah,
And it wouldn't have to go to, I don't think everyone in the city.
Yeah.
Just,
And feedback is helpful too. Like if there's things that we're missing or a place that we should be posting or talking to people, it's helpful to get that feedback.
okay, thank you.
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah.
I think that some misunderstanding might be that the changes to the LDRs affect a lot more the future use, not the current use. You know, so that every property that's already used has a certain use, it can continue to be that use. It doesn't change that at all. But I mean, for this particular property, yeah, the density, I mean, they could build a lot more there. And I understand that that's an issue, that there's going to be some restriction on the type of uses that can go there. But in fact, they would be allowed to build more. So it's really a question of future use, not so much current use. And I think that's where the question was addressed, you know, what can you do with that property in the future? So I get that. That makes sense to me.
More comments?
Hi, Representative Hyman. Sorry not to keep going on this topic, but I'm actually here trying to find out something else. But this discussion line has brought up an interest for me. In my district currently, I only have 3 brick and mortar stores, and so this might be a question directed to Paul at the moment. But does the cider mill business, is that affected by the changes in a similar way to the doggy daycare? I'm not exactly sure of how it was rezoned.
So the cider mill property was rezoned to low scale neighborhood. So that was most of the southeast quadrant, that is where any development is allowed, is low scale neighborhood. It was not R7NC before. It was SEQVC.
Yes.
Village commercial.
Yeah.
The current use that is there would likely be, well, first of all, the current use would be able to stay,
Right.
but a similar use to it.
It becomes
maybe-
non-conforming.
Sorry?
I'm sorry. Does it become non-conforming?
Not necessarily. I don't know the exact specs of the mill market, but there is the neighborhood commercial, limited neighborhood commercial use is allowed in that district on that street, like in that location. And it would allow a smaller scale retail outlet, the way that mill market is. I don't know if it precisely meets the limits on square footage, but very likely something very similar to the mill market would be allowed to continue into the future. So it wouldn't, again, likely, I don't know the square footage, not be non-conforming if it meets the requirements of that use.
And it's got a new owner. I can't remember. It should be called Next Gen Automotive, which is adjacent to that. That could remain.
It can remain, the current, what is the use that it currently is, it would not be able to change to it would be non-conforming.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it would have to stay a garage.
Yes,
Or
be converted to
or
something
be
that's
converted to something that is conforming.
Thank you.
okay, Sandy, do you want to?
Sandy Julie again.
Before we go further, can I just make one further clarification on the whole last discussion?
Oh.
It's an important discussion that was just taking place just to understand the current adopted regulations. The Happy Tales facility is already a non-conforming use. So the changes that took place in 2022 that moved it from industrial open space district to the R7 NC at that time made it a non-conformity. So it is not becoming any, the designation as being non-conforming is not changing this evening. The importance of the subject is not any diminished by that, but its current status is that it's already non-conforming.
Thank you
So,
for the
yeah.
clarification.
Okay,
Wait, sorry.
Oh.
To be clear, what district was it currently in?
Currently, it is residential 7 neighborhood commercial R7NC, and it is permitted as a kennel and pet daycare, which is a different use than pet grooming.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. Pet grooming is just pet grooming. There's no keeping of the animals during the day. There's no, so it's a different category.
Yeah, I mean, in under the industrial use, I imagine when that zoning was created, that all of Heinsberg Road could have been strip development at that point, you know, in terms of uses, right? And that was the desire to change it to a more residential use, the desire not to have strip development going all the way down Heinsberg Road. I mean, just speaking as a resident, you know, I wouldn't want to see strip development with big parking lots going down residential, you know, in front of residential. So the limited size of commercial seems to make sense. Just
are you finished? I noticed, well, when I attended the listening session on July 15th, I learned that the traditional neighborhood development PUD was going to be optional in all zoning districts that allow residential use when the development includes at least 4 but less than 10 acres, and that the traditional neighborhood development PUD TND would be mandatory in situations in which the development included 10 or more acres. I was very pleased to learn that, and I think you had some headings in your spotlights or whatever they were called that talked about thriving neighborhoods, and I think that the traditional neighborhood development PUD very much promotes the development of thriving neighborhoods or supports them. I understand that in Paul's memo, there's a proposal to eliminate the mandatory use of the traditional neighborhood development PUD and make it optional for developments of 10 or more acres instead of it being required. One of the things that I think a TND does is it promotes the development of missing middle housing types. It also, depending on the size, requires more than one housing type. And it also facilitates the development of more affordable housing units and also sort of across the the price spectrum. And so I have to look at our rules and see, for example, we have an entire article that defines requirements that we believe are necessary to promote the protection of natural resources. And so I think that, we need to look favorably on a requirement that would promote thriving neighborhoods, more housing types, make affordable housing more likely to happen because of the multiple housing types, and having prices across the price spectrum. So I'm here to ask you not to change what is published in the proposed rules, which is that traditional neighborhood development PUDs will be required for developments 10 acres or more. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. We have other comments or questions? Come back.
May I?
Ryan, we have someone in the room we just called up, but you can go second.
Thanks.
Donna Little again. I just want it to be on the record that when our property changed from commercial industrial open space zoning in 2022 to R7 ND, we never ever were told that it was done. We never were consulted. We were never notified that that was happening. So there's a lot of shocking news to us tonight that so many uses for our property have been eliminated. And I would recommend that the people are required to, when they do a business or have any kind of commercial activity, they're required to supply a list of adjoining property owners and or those who might be affected by their business, so that they can be notified. And I think that that's what you were talking about a few minutes ago. It's only a fair move. Because even though column number 3 goes down through the commercial section, when you compare it to what was in 2016 when we bought the property, it's far less. There are far less uses. And as far as our location, we're located right on the highway. We have our own cut-in, our own driveway. We are not we're not involved in any of the neighborhood traffic, except that we often have been told that we're the Butler Farm Daycare because so many of our clients come from the neighborhood, and we are a service to the neighborhood.
Great, thank you. Ryan?
Hey, yeah, Ryan Doyle, Woodside Drive. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I remember this discussion happening maybe a month or two ago, in particular about the aspect of pet daycares and trying to parse out how to best sort that into the zoning model. And it seems like you really did come up with the perhaps best way to do it, especially when we think about existing neighborhoods and retroactively turning something into a commercial entity to serve the neighborhood. Suddenly bringing dogs in would be weird. But since it's there already and neighborhood can develop around it, it does make a lot of sense because it does serve a large neighborhood and is also close to a lot of industrial commercial uses where people would be going to work during the day, like Dynapower, for example, which is a very large employer. And so since it doesn't really make sense to perhaps make zoning changes, maybe it would make sense to put that parcel back into the commercial zone rather than having it be in the neighborhood zone, therefore allowing the, for example, office conversion or whatnot. Just a thought of something you guys can consider, because I know that it is a big effort to try to not make more places non-conforming. I heard what Paul said about it having already been made non-conforming, but I do empathize with how you all know this is dense material. These meetings are very long. It's hard for the general public to really access this stuff the same way until it comes up to the city council. But I think you guys might have an opportunity to make some changes that ameliorate that before that stage. And for the people who were speaking and asking questions before, there are 2 city councilors online at the meeting, Elizabeth and Andrew. And if you, for those of you in the audience who have concerns about the process, I would bring it up with them and see if they can work. It is a city objective right now to try to increase outreach, and your feedback will help them make those changes. So please reach out to them as well later on. Thanks.
Great. Other comments or questions in this section? Okay,
This would probably be a good point before we move on to the next section. The other written comment that I shared with you was from O'Brien Brothers. The district, for the most part, you kept the zoning boundaries where they are. There was one shift that was advanced, which is along Kennedy Drive. The neighborhood that's the Hills Eastview neighborhood that's under construction was in the residential 12 district. That is proposed to become MSN, medium scale neighborhood. At the corner of Kimball Avenue and Kennedy Drive, that was commercial 1 limited retail. The O'Brien Brothers approval immediately adjacent to that commercial 1 limited residential neighborhood is for 6 large scale, mostly residential buildings, 50 plus dwelling units in each building, including 2 of which have been built. Because the MSN caps out at 12 dwelling units in a building, the proposal was to move the C1 LR district to incorporate these 6 already approved large buildings. The feedback provided to you, and Evan is on there, is that in doing so, 2 quasi-residential uses that were allowed in the R12 of assisted living and congregate care become not permissible in the C1LR district. So they're recommending those be added. So Evan, feel free. I just want to make sure we didn't go past that section.
Just as a very quick clarification, congregate care, assisted living, and continuum of care facility are all the same use line. It's 3 different definitions, but it's all like the way it's written now, if you permit one, you've permitted that whole spectrum.
Generally described as congregate.
Congregate, assisted living, and continuum of care.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Paul, first of all, I appreciate you guys hearing us on this topic. Yeah, it seems like it sort of makes sense in this location. It is accessed by public transportation. You know, it's a dense area. I think it might have just been maybe an oversight that it's not included in the C1LR, considering that the R12 is going away. So we'd just like you to consider it. Thank you.
thank you, Evan. And Paul, for making sure we didn't get past that. Other items? Or we can move on to the 3rd section of LDR amendments. The section we're calling streamlining the LDR process and standards, plus minor and technical amendments. Or anything else that we might have missed. Okay, are we missing anyone online? You are welcome to unmute yourself to get our attention. Okay, so the idea is that when we're done with the public comment, you still have another minute, we will close the public hearing. And then the commissioners up here will have some discussion. I think we have some input from the legal review from staff, and we will have kind of general discussion at that point. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything?
Move to close the public hearing on LDRs 2401 to 2410.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have unanimously closed the public hearing. Does it make sense to hear about the legal comments first?
I think what would make the most sense is if you all have any discussion that you would like to have about any of the public comments, that might make sense when it's fresh in everyone's mind. And then we can move to the staff recommendations that were provided in your packet. The legal and staff recommendations are sort of interspersed, and we can point out which are which when able to. Some of it is kind of meeting a middle ground, and both things are incorporated. And so we can talk about those staff recommendations second. And then there's a few more cleanup things that we have identified in the last day or two that would also need to be discussed after that.
Would we possible, there were a couple like minor comments I want to make. Would that be a good time? There's comments I would have made as a public comment had I been a member of the public, and would have talked up months ago if I'd been mayor commission. So it's a couple minor comments on the item 2. Would that make sense to make those now real quick?
Sure, that'd be up to Jessica if you.
Oh, Jessica, sorry.
So technically I'm in charge of the meeting. It might not always seem that way. And I do often defer to staff on technical items, but I think that makes sense to me. So you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just these are kind of minor technical issues, but just a couple things I noticed on the what was it called? The number the changes to the transportation demand management planning. One comment I had was on the e-bike optimized bike parking. There was some things about how if you essentially are providing charging points for e-bikes, you would get credit as transportation traffic demand management. One thing I noticed, however, was that it was mentioning that you could install the plugs on both short-term and long-term bike parking. And my concern with that was that so with the electric vehicle charger, like those things, they lock your vehicle, they're waterproof, you can charge indoors, outdoors. With electric bikes, the chargers are basically glorified laptop chargers, and using them outdoors would maybe there's some brand that has a weatherproof one that I'm not aware of, but in general, you wouldn't want to charge an e-bike outdoors. It's something that really does have to happen indoors, either by garage, or a lot of them have removable batteries for that reason. So you can bring the battery inside to charge them. So bringing that back, my concern was that short-term bicycle parking is often just outdoor, outdoor racks, and that maybe it would make more sense to restrict that could only be applied to long-term parking, because my thought is that if this, like, essentially that'll be my understanding is that what's currently proposed, if you built a plug on the outside of the building, that would count towards e-bike charging. And while that could be used for an electric car, for an e-bike, I don't think anyone would ever actually use that to charge an e-bike. So basically, just say my proposal will be say that e-bike charging. Adding the e-bike charger should only be in long-term parking. Is that, yeah, that was one comment I had.
Okay. So
I mean, doesn't long-term parking include that in the definition?
Right. By definition, long-term parking is indoors.
okay, so
Long-term parking meaning things like in this bill, like employee parking, resident parking, that kind of thing.
So it looks like they've found
Yes.
the location that refers to that in section 2I there. I mean, I think it makes sense to address each of your comments as you bring them up as a group, so we're kind of just moving things along. So does anyone have any,
These require a DC output.
This is a wall outlet, yeah, just a normal wall. AC, these are AC, yes, sir, AC, yeah. This is you charge them in normal wall outlets.
Yep.
Like charging e-bikes, like charging laptop, you want to do indoors, is what I'm trying to say.
do you, John, you have one of these, right? Do
Mhm.
you, what do you
Well,
think
the
about?
charger is heavy, so you don't usually carry it with you. You know, I don't carry mine with me, but I don't, you know, if I were to take it a longer distance, I usually would just bring an extra battery with me instead of assuming that I can charge it somewhere else, because you never find someplace to charge it when you really need it. You just have to know that you have enough battery. But I would question though, if it's covered, but if it's short term but covered, would that?
Well, our requirements, so our requirements for short term, I don't require covered, but long term it does require coverage. So I think you've picked up on it.
No, I think it's a good point, because it could be dangerous. Yeah, you're right. It's a transformer and it's not an outdoor. I don't even know that it's an outdoor rated, extension.
I've got one, it certainly isn't.
I don't think it is.
Okay, so I guess, Paul and Kelsey, just for, what would be the best, if we want to make this change, what would be the best way for us to do that for you to like get it recorded? Would we
Straw poll as you go on these things. You don't have to do formal votes, but straw poll and we'll record the straw polls.
Okay, so let's do a straw poll on if you're in favor of removing the short-term bike parking spaces for the e-bike.
Short-term charging.
Yeah, charging. Does that seem favorable? Okay, thumbs up in general. Okay, so we'll do that. Next one.
And this is more just on a related note on the e-bike optimized bike parking. So I also know that long-term storage, that ground floor offices count as long-term bike storage, is my understanding of the long-term bike storage. And my understanding of that means that a office with 5 ground floor offices would or over 30%, whatever the standard was, would automatically qualify as e-bike optimized bike parking. So essentially office buildings that have ground floor office would qualify for that 2% reduction. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I just want to make clear that's what we're trying to do, because it may just be the offices are just, but that's it. I don't think, I'm not saying we need to change. I just want to make sure that that's what we're intending, I guess. That's my comment there. Yeah. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Where is that?
I was looking at the definition of long-term bike parking. The private offices can't qualify as that. Was my understanding.
I think the idea was that, if you get to your office building and you don't have to carry your bike up or down steps, you could just wheel it in the door. It would be acceptable.
Right, and to be clear, this is private office spaces, not private businesses that are offices. So if there's like an open office concept, that's not a private office space. A private office space is you as an employee have a office, with a door essentially, or like an area that is yours that has been shown to be, you can store a bike in there yourself as an individual.
I guess where my comment is coming from is that when I look at this, this regulation, the idea is anyone who's visiting this place should be able to charge your e-bike. But because private offices count as long-term bike storage, then you could have a situation where if you have just a bunch of offices on the ground floor, that counts as e-bike, as them building e-bike optimized bike parking, even though it's not really available to anyone other than the people that actually work in that office. That's just my comments that's what I'm trying to say. I don't think it's a big deal either way, but that's just what I was trying to say there. Yeah. I just think this thing to noodle on, I guess.
The terminology is storage doesn't sit well with me. It would be long-term bike parking.
For the
It
day.
is technically long time parking is the term.
Yeah, storage implies
But-
you leave it there and go away for 3
Right.
months.
Yeah, I guess I was using parking storage interchangeably.
It's like parking for the day. You know,
yeah.
I think it's a bit arbitrary, but
Yeah,
I don't, I mean, it's basically a way of counting points toward your transportation allotment, so.
no,
I don't see how it's a real critical point, but I mean, it depends on the office. I mean, I took my bicycle up the elevator at college, like for years and nobody ever complained. And I locked it to my desk and it was open office. So you can put a bike anywhere really.
yeah, no, if no one else has got any,
Yeah.
if no one else has any strong opinions in this, it's not a big deal here. But yeah. Same with, and final point I had, very minor, a very specific one. I was looking at the parking size dimension requirements, and there's a lot of simplification. There was a pretty big table, and I think it was like section 13-2 G1. And so it basically changed a pretty complicated table of like how much curb space at different angles you have and all that stuff. And yeah, I agree that changes for the better. And just replace it with a simple stall size of parking spaces are 9 feet by 18 feet. My comment on it, however, is that 9 foot by 18 feet is a great, pretty good catch-all for any kind of angled or perpendicular parking. It's too short for parallel parking. So basically my proposal is to send you, I think it does still need to be a little more complex nuance and say like 9 feet by 18 feet for angled or perpendicular, and then the existing standard for parallel was 22 feet by 8 feet, just because you need the longer distance to back in. That was the existing standard. Yeah, either just add that line in, that the existing standard, and
So I
yeah.
don't disagree with you.
Okay.
And also the legislature this year in H 687 said a municipality shall define a parking space as 9 by 18.
Wait, what?
It shall not be larger than that. So that is, while I don't disagree with any of your assessment, that is not within our authority.
So the state effectively banned parallel parking unless you have a really short car.
Well, it doesn't say that they can't make them bigger. We just can't mandate it to be bigger. So
I
a developer
see.
could build a 22 by 8 if they choose. We just can't mandate it. So
Okay. I see. Okay.
And I think our working assumption in the planning field is that the engineers who design the spaces will design them appropriately.
Okay.
We just
Yeah.
can't mandate them to be larger.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
So it's
I was missing that
one of
context.
the interesting components of Act 181/6.
It's a little confusing in my opinion, but
is there the word minimum or something? Or
So
would that-
we may not require spaces larger than 9 by 18 is what the legislation says.
When we have in that, I didn't, does it say minimum in ours? So it makes it a little more clear that someone could maybe go a little longer for a
Oh, I understand. your question.
parallel,
Let's check.
like, cause if you say 9 by 18, then us engineers are like, oh no, I guess I can't go bigger for parallel.
yeah, it was my reading certainly, though. I guess, that was just me not understanding.
No, you're right. And people are worse and worse at parallel parking. Like apparently my mother-in-law has never done it. She was in the car with me and I did it. She's like, wow, you can parallel park. I'm like, didn't you need to do this for your license?
So as drafted, it says new parking spaces shall be 9 by 18 feet. So, and then we can accommodate a smaller one. Maybe there's a way to write it to say, I
say
don't
at least.
disagree with that.
Yeah, or minimum or,
Yeah, shall makes it sound like it needs to be exactly 9 by 18 feet.
oh yeah, but then you say you may allow a smaller one. Maybe or a larger one for.
Yeah, I
people,
think
like,
I'm happy to look at that. I would like to look at the state language again because it may not be as permissive as. I'll look at it.
Yeah.
I'll try
I
to
just
do it.
want people to be
I'll
able to
try to do
determine
it
parking,
as we
that's all.
can, but yeah.
so as a straw poll, are people okay with, Kelsey making an adjustment based on the state language to make this a little more flexible if possible?
Yes.
Straw poll? Yes. Okay, Kelsey, you can adjust to make it more flexible if possible.
And by flexible, you mean allowing for larger ones if the applicant chooses?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, because it already
Okay,
says
that is.
it may allow for a smaller one.
Yeah, that's
so-
where I got tripped
yeah.
up, 'cause I thought that meant not allow for large.
Okay. Con, was that all of them on your list?
Yep, that's everything. Thanks for
Okay.
listening.
Sure. So I guess back to comments, suggestions, follow up from the comments we received. Paul?
First, I think we should make it really clear to people that the only changes that we made in the land development regulations were to conform them to state law, and that we didn't consolidate the zoning districts with any thought of rewriting the land development regulations that are changing. For example, the issue of residential to commercial or commercial to residential that came up tonight. And I think we're all clear about that, right? I mean, this is what we did. We made changes to conform to state law and we consolidated. And in the consolidation, we intended to do nothing to change the land development regulations themselves. Is this clear?
I mean, I think we knew that there might be some minor changes because each of the districts might have slightly different nuances. So when you consolidate, there might be some changes between
Yeah.
them. So
It sounded like their problems went back to 2022, right?
2016 is what.
Or even 16 now. Yeah. Okay, so and my second thing I wanted to talk about is I don't remember which meeting it was, but it was a ways back, probably in, I don't know, anyway, but it was the discussion of a conforming residential lot size to commercial lot size at 7,000 square feet. Do we want to do that, or do we not want to do that? Or, I mean, we were going to have a discussion about it the next week and then we didn't, we haven't met since then.
So that discussion has to happen today. It is in the memo for everything, every residential building type under 4 units has to have the same minimum lot size. So that's a discussion that's in your memo to be teed up to talk about today. There is also a proposal to have that limited neighborhood commercial use that's allowed in these residential districts to be 7,000 square feet, which would match that, it currently matches the 3 and 4 plexes. But the commission does need to have a conversation. You cannot keep it as singles and duplexes being 5,000 square feet and 3s and 4s being 7,000 square feet. So then sort of the second conversation can be if you want to then have the limited neighborhood commercial, like sort of all other non-residential uses be allowed on the same lot size. But I think you need to land on that lot size first.
Okay. So we'll have a discussion of that later, or do you want to do that now, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's up
just
to-
got started with it. We might as well keep going.
Yeah. Well, I really have a question, because I talked with Emily Krasnow about this issue and I said, gee, 5,000 really makes sense for residential, duplexes and it seems unreasonable that, we have to enlarge our minimum lot sizes to accommodate this regulation that the state probably never considered what they were doing to a place like South Burlington when they wrote that. And what if they change it again next year and then we have to change it back? I just think it's, it seems like the 7,000 square foot makes sense for commercial, but 5,000 really makes sense for residential. And why should all residential lots have to be 7,000 square foot minimum just to accommodate for fourplexes? That just doesn't make sense.
And
We go down to 5,400 for residential.
Presently in the draft, single and unit buildings are 5,000 square feet. And 3 and 4 plexes are 7,000 square feet, but as Kelsey alluded to, under Act 181 that was just passed last month, 1 through 4 units in a building have to be on the same number. So you have to choose.
They have to
either.
be allowed to be on the same number.
Yes, they have to be allowed in the regulations to be on the same number. That doesn't necessarily mean it gets achieved.
It doesn't have to be practically possible if
Oh.
you're setting a minimum.
Well,
It has to be
A min-
possible, but not every case has to fit it.
No, I would disagree with that.
in our deliberations here, we reduced it from 7,000 to 5,000.
Mhm.
It had always been 7,000 prior.
Yeah. It had been 9,500 it's currently 9,500.
I also mentioned personal experience. I actually looked up in response. I lived I was living in California in Berkeley, which is a area that's actually been often criticized for not being nearly dense enough.
Mhm.
I was living in it was a whole neighborhood where a lot, I think the lots were all about 5,400 square feet or so. And I was in a single family that had been converted into a duplex by splitting into 2 levels, and then an accessory dwelling unit was in the backyard. And so effectively it was a triplex on a 5,400 foot lot in a quiet residence neighborhood. You would have never noticed it from the front. It again was like a 2-story building, pretty small. And I don't know, I mean it's definitely uncommon to see that kind of density, but it felt like a pretty quiet, charming neighborhood. And I don't necessarily think I guess what I'm saying is the idea of a triplex and a 4-plex and a 5,000 square foot lot doesn't strike me as that crazy, especially given that we already have setback requirements, coverage requirements, and height requirements.
Exactly.
They're going to stop anything huge and that people might not want to see. At least that's my take on it.
Right.
So based on that experience, do you think maybe 4 could fit reasonably on that size? I mean, it sounds like that was a little bigger and it was.
I mean, I guess I'd have to see on the setbacks. So, I mean, I guess fundamentally, if you can fit a 3,000 square foot house on it, you can put 4 750 unit, 750 square foot studios. Do you have a question if I'm saying something incorrect here?
No. I just wanted to step in and just make sure that everybody is clear. When you set a minimum, it doesn't need to actually hold the thing. It is just if you have the ideal lot that you could end up having the thing on it. Like you could set the minimum lot size as 100 square feet. Nothing can actually be built on a 100 square foot lot, but that's the minimum. That's not saying that's what the lot has to be. So you could say, if you said 5,000 square foot minimum lot size for, 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, you don't have to practically be able to fit a 4-plex on a 5,000 square foot lot. And especially you don't have to be able to fit it on every 5,000 square foot lot. So just putting that in context that it doesn't have to be practically possible in every case. It is just an allowance if a person can make it work with, as Colin said, the setbacks and the coverage requirements and other things.
As an example, in the Burlington Neighborhood Code, for the same single 2, 3 family, those low scale neighborhoods, they eliminated minimum lot size altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my thought is.
They regulate it in a different way, but the lot size is.
It seems to be the other mechanisms like setbacks and coverage are I can't see the 5,000 actually ever or rarely being the limiting factor. I guess.
In this draft, we've actually done that with large multifamily. There is no minimum lot size because the coverage requirements, the setbacks, the stormwater that's required, civic space, there's a lot of other things constraining the size of a building. It's not required to be any particular size.
So my issue with it is that I live on a 7,000 square foot lot, and I would not want to live on a smaller lot than I do. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone else either, so, that's my point of view, I guess, is that it's a pretty small lot as it is. And I think to encourage, I don't know what, genteel living, I think that's probably the lot size we should have.
I guess my response to that would be, like it's more so allowing people to build there if they want to. Like I'd be quite happy to a 5,000 square foot lot. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I've lived on 5,000 square foot and it was fine. I guess it's sort of let the market do what the market does. And, I don't think there will be many lots on this size. Like, I don't know, like, I have a friend that lives in a 250 square foot studio apartment. I would hate to live there. She loves it. And I'm glad that exists for her, So I guess my temptation is that I totally hear you that a 5,000 square foot lot is definitely not for everyone, but I think it should be allowed for the people that do want it. And honestly, most lots won't be that small because all people like you don't want that. But at least that'll be my response. But yeah,
It's about 1/8 of an acre, which is a very common size for a development.
It's actually a little bit bigger than that, isn't it? Yeah, it's like 1/7 of an acre and I have a 1/6 of an acre and I think I have lots of land. I mean, for a single family house.
I think,
And you could, I think it could easily be duplex. So
I
I
think-
would just as soon leave it as 5,000 and
Leave it.
and that, so Jen, I think the question, and maybe even what Paul's getting at, is maybe that feels comfortable for a single or a duplex, but with this new state rule, would it also be okay for a small multi up to a four units on that egg?
I would say if somebody's creative enough to come up with a way of doing some very small, affordable units, 4 of them on a 5,000 square foot, we should let them.
one thing I also add is so I moved here 2 years ago, and wow, finding an apartment was hard in this area. It was actually way more difficult than it was when I moved to San Francisco, oddly. And I was for a lot of like Facebook housing groups and the likes, and a big thing that the people that sort of get stuck in those groups are the folks that really, really, really just want a tiny studio. Because you have a lot of folks that are like, in their 30s, still living who can't afford a large 1-bedroom unit but on their salary, and are just sick and tired of having roommates. And a lot of people I don't care how tiny it is, I just don't want roommates. I just want the smallest box I can give me. And there are very, very few of those around. I mean, there's some, but there's certainly, I do think there's some pent up demand that we don't really see, because I think a lot of those people end up just getting roommates and, moving with a couple other folks. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I do think there's some pent up demand for micro units among people who are younger, who just do not want roommates, and all they want is affordable and small. So I guess that's my perspective, and I want to enable small units when they get. I think, and the lot size thing can stick. And I'm aware that this is not talking about like minimum habitable size of the units. I'm aware that's entirely separate things, but yeah, yeah.
I don't think it's difficult to put a quad on 5,000 square feet. It's easy. You've got 2 by 2. You see them all. Well, certainly in Montreal, you see that kind of thing.
We see a lot of Northern
2
Benefit.
down to a,
That's doable.
Because the footprint is then.
okay. I guess I feel more comfortable with what Kelsey said, that it's not required, it's allowed.
Right.
I feel like your lawyer perspective is very fun sometimes and helpful.
Yeah, we can leave,
Any more thoughts on this? Are we ready for at least a straw poll?
leave it where it is.
Well, so where it is actually varied lot sizes, ranging between 5,000 and 10,000, just depending on the units. And then the proposed is 5,000 for, this is page 5. So I guess the straw poll in favor of the proposed chart, which is 5,000 square foot minimum lot size for single family through small multi 4 unit. Okay, in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so a split vote on that, but it does kind of pass the straw poll. Other items people want to bring up for discussion?
Hi, Jessica.
Hang on a second, Ryan. I'm just wondering if would it make sense since that was split to instead of a straw poll?
Sure.
I think maybe just so that it's clear later on.
Okay.
Since it wasn't unanimous, that Paul can be formally on the record of not agreeing with it, I think that might be just sort of clean for
Or-
the minutes.
I will make the motion to, have the total minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet for single unit buildings through townhouse and small multi-unit 4 units, all at 5,000.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, 1 nay. Paul? Very good, so passes into the draft. Next items people want to bring up for discussion?
Yes, what about the carve out that went the way of all flesh with the conservation PUD? On page. Where are we here? 11. No, on page 8 according to this, but page 8 packet.
Okay,
So the staff has proposed that the 2 acre subdivision would be exempt from master plan. And I'm wondering whether that is intended to replace the 2 acre carve out.
Effectively, yes.
Effectively, yes.
Mhm.
I had also, in our prior discussion of this many moons ago, suggested that we should have perhaps a sliding scale, that it's a 2 acre subdivision from up to 10 acre lot, and from 10 to 20 acres, it may be 3 acre, a 3 acre exemption. And over 20, it's a 4 acre exemption, and that's it, because it doesn't seem to 2 acres. If somebody has a larger property, it would be more fair to have a sliding scale, not be stuck with what's allowed for 4 to 10 acres. So give a landowner a little more flexibility.
in flexibility in the number of lots subdivided or the size of lots subdivided?
The size of the exemption.
The size of the exempted lot, they'd still only be allowed to do 1 lot broken off, or are you talking about
Well,
multiple lots broken
Yeah,
off?
we do say that the 2 acre exemption can be subdivided.
Yeah, so it's written as a total of 2 acres being subdivided without having to go through master plan. So if you decided you wanted to cut off the 2 acres and then subdivide it into 8, you actually could do that.
You could or you could not.
Could, yes.
No, I understood that, but I'm thinking that if somebody has a larger parcel of land, then it seems reasonable to give them a larger exemption.
I'm surprised
Mhm.
that you would want this.
Well, it's a question of fairness. I mean, let's say 10 acres and he has 2, so it's 20%. But if he has 20 acres and it's 2, well, it's half that percentage of the parcel, and even less if he has more than 20 acres. Just a suggestion. I know it doesn't. I mean,
Yeah, I guess I mean, I'm open to discussion, but when I was thinking about this exemption, I was thinking, okay, 2 acres
which is what we have.
is
before.
discrete. I can picture 2 acres. I guess when I start to picture maybe like 100 acre parcel and like
And
10 acres, I
No,
mean, that
it's
feels,
still 4.
that feels big.
No, it would still be 4.
How would it still be 4 with what you're talking about?
Anything over 20 acres is 4.
Oh, you just made that up?
No, I mentioned it if you
Like a
know.
second, like a second
To 10
ago.
acres is 2,
I
Okay.
guess,
10 to 20 is 3,
Oh, okay.
over 20 is 4.
am I correct in understanding that the purpose of this is to carve out a lot to essentially build on and potentially conserve the rest of it? Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
I guess the question is, you could put a pretty big house on 2 acres and a lot of outbuildings. And I guess I'm wondering, how necessary is it to have to make the language more complex to allow someone to build on, carve out 4 acres for building a residence versus just 2 acres, which is still a substantial.
Well, there's no reason to assume that there'd be one residence on 2 acres or on 4 acres.
So Michael, just as a point of clarification, the only thing that this does is exempt a landowner from the process of master planning. So you could do you could do additional development of the rest of your property, but you would just have to go through that master planning process.
Mhm.
So it's a procedural exemption more than anything that mirrors the purpose of the carve out for conservation PUDs that were eliminated. In recognition that there are maybe 2 handfuls worth of property owners in the city who have 10 or so acres, and to be able to subdivide one additional area before going through a big sort of development process. Just wanting to clarify that that's the only thing that changes is the amount of process that you have to do for that small carve out.
Yeah, we have one before the DRB right now with, it's a 16-acre lot. And since these regulations haven't been promulgated yet, the old ones apply. So there's a 2-acre carve out for that particular applicant.
Mhm.
But if the commission feels that 2 acres is the limit, then we shouldn't relate this exemption to the size of the overall parcel. Then I'll accept it as being the replacement, but it seems to me that somebody who's got over 20 acres should get more than the 2-acre carve out. I'm not wedded to it, but I think it's fair.
Does anyone have thoughts on Michael's proposal or what's in the packet? I guess I like what's in the packet. I felt like this was something that was maybe missing when we got rid of the conservation PUD. I don't have 10 acres, but if I did, or if I had 16 acres, it'd be nice to be able to kind of go through a low tech process to do something, a portion. And I guess I feel like a portion being 2 acres seems like kind of a lot of land.
Sir, I think you already said, but so the current the current carve out is 2 acres, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess to say we're not actually removing any ability to use the land with this, are we? Like, we're sort of keeping the same, like 4 acres is expanding the carve out from the status quo. I just want to clear about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
But this here is kind of missing from the current draft because we kind of removed a section and then it didn't get put back in.
Gotcha.
So this is kind of
Yeah, what is effectively in the draft is that if you have a certain amount of land, if you want to do anything at all, you have to go through the whole master plan process that involves a lot of engineering and a lot of expense. This sort of puts back in that ability to do I want to carve off 2 acres for my kid to build a house, those sort of very small scale, low impact subdivisions.
If you decide to adjust the number, we recommend giving staff the opportunity to look where the cross references are. So for example, in subdivision, if a subdivision of more than 2 acres in size must include a civic space, under 2 acres, you don't have to include it. So those numbers are meant to match up so that beyond that, you might want to do a master plan since you have to include a civic space in it. So if you just choose to follow something that would have tiers, we request the ability to examine the cross references and come back to you with some recommendations.
I mean, what's written is more or less what we've limited discussions we've had. So.
Also, I can bring it up in mapping, but I don't have to. We identified that there are a total of, I believe, 11 or 12 total parcels in the city with more than 10 acres of developable land.
In a residential allowed zoning district.
Right, in a residential allowed zoning district. And of those, 2 of them don't have 10 acres contiguous of development. It's sort of split up. So there's really only 8 parcels that, 8 or 9 parcels that fall into this category total. Above 10 acres.
Yes.
Yeah, not to say that those aren't valuable properties. I'm just discussing the scale of the subject.
Yeah. How large are the larger parcels?
There are 1 to 2 that are over 15 acres of developable land, up to 60. The rest are between 10 and 15.
So perhaps my thought would be if we're creating a carve out for land, for properties over 20 acres that only applies to 1 or 2, it's like it sort of sounds a little spot zony to me. If it only actually applies to 2 parcels, like that's.
And hold that thought for when we talk about TNDs, because that's the next.
Yeah, we're doing a great job of jumping around tonight. Here we, which makes me wonder if we need to kind of go in order of the packet here in some way.
Can we address one of the things that came up in the public meeting?
Let's do it.
Great idea.
That's where you started your whole discussion.
Seems like that's where we started out.
Yes.
And I think it would be probably worthwhile to go through the list of commercial uses allowed in the medium scale residential. Because, I mean, I think there are probably uses that would make sense there that I don't think we're allowing. And one of the ones I had thought about was, well, I'm not sure if this is considered general office, but, I think it would be really kind of very convenient to have a commercial, I'm not sure what they call it. It's like rent-a-desk kind of things where, for people who have families and they just don't have space in their house, or you have a small apartment and you want to be able to have a place to work and not have to maybe drive someplace to get to it, having a convenient, small office, rent-a-desk kind of thing, that would be general office, wouldn't it? And yet we're not allowing general office in those locations. And I think it actually makes a lot of sense because the size of the building is definitely limited. You wouldn't be having large office buildings, and you wouldn't be having, a lot of parking for something like that. I think the dog care makes actually a lot of sense as long as there's noise control and, there's not a lot of overnight boarding and stuff like that. Like I know the doggy daycare thing, they had problems with noise there, but it was specific to a tenant that was right next to them. I think other than that, if the other tenant wasn't a yoga studio, it wouldn't have been such a big deal, right? Wasn't that the issue?
Didn't you just suggest they could put a yoga studio in their expanded building?
No, I'm just saying,
I know.
there's other commercial uses that I think could make sense.
No.
In that MSR. It's exactly the issue they were talking about.
Can we pull up the definition of limited neighborhood commercial? Because I'm a little unclear on exactly what that means here. Like, for example, like would a couple small co-working spaces, is that neighborhood commercial?
Yeah, I love that new zoning district.
Okay, hang on 1 second.
Yeah.
It's not a catch-all, but it is a category that includes multiple uses based on size. That'll be a good one to review.
1 moment, please. Okay.
everyone become a lot more familiar with this document.
Okay, it will probably take more than a week.
To find it.
You're doing surprisingly well.
Yeah, I mean, as we're getting units that are smaller and smaller, I think that there's probably more types of space that people might have to rent to be able
Yeah,
to.
this is a new one now. It would.
Oh, okay.
Old print.
I mean, storage is another one.
Oh.
You know, storage space is another one. It would be really convenient to have storage space located really close. Not necessarily those big garage type storage units, but you know, just a small scale neighborhood size business that you can store
No,
all that extra stuff you didn't really need.
I guess there's two questions though, if that.
So this is the list in here of what falls under limited neighborhood commercial use. This was developed a few years ago for a limited applicability. And then was sort of modified in this draft, well, over the last few months of uses that are customary and historically to be, well, not customary historically, intended to be very focused on serving its immediate neighborhood, to the extent that zoning can. You know, somebody creates the best bagel shop in New England, it might serve more than its local neighborhood, but to the extent that zoning can. And it's limited by the uses and capped by the size here. And it's proposed to be allowed essentially on all, anywhere in the low or medium scale neighborhoods, as long as it is on a collector or arterial street.
So I guess the point, so for the particular we were speaking earlier, this wouldn't, they were saying they had a 10,000 square foot building in this case, so that wouldn't really be, you'd have two 2,500 square foot uses, but you could only use about half the building under this.
And then the other half would have to be something that
Other
is
use.
otherwise allowed in the district.
Okay, oh, I see, so you'd have to,
So,
yeah,
for example, personal instruction facility is allowed in the district, period. Because it's the medium scale, so that could actually be more than that in this instance, or it could be a childcare facility, or it could be some of the other ones.
Except it does say there's a maximum of 2 uses per lot, including,
Two limited neighborhood uses.
that's not what it says.
Oh.
2 uses per lot, including residential. So if you had a first floor corner store, you could have 2 apartments above it or something like that.
Okay. Thank
What
you.
about concierge medical care? I understand that's a real thing now, expanding. I mean, I think that there's a lot of small offices that.
So the
small-
difference
Small office types that could fit into this category.
in the previous discussions of this category, the real crux of the issue was, is it, and you mentioned it earlier, actually, like, is it something that will be drawing people to this location from elsewhere or not?
Yeah.
The intention here is that it is something like a bodega sized small market where you have one and then you have another one 6 blocks away or 10 blocks away. There's a lot of other uses that you wouldn't, like, for example, we considered medical office, but someone who doesn't choose their medical office necessarily based on the one that is closest. They choose it based on the one that they like or that has a certain specialty or whatever it is.
Or it has an opening.
Or has an opening, yeah.
Beauty salons, nail care.
I think this
Dog care is really one. I mean, that makes a lot of sense for a neighborhood. Because, you know, especially a big neighborhood, you know,
Well,
like,
and pet grooming is
Yeah.
allowed in that district, period. It's just the kennels and,
oh,
right?
No,
That's-
not in the vicinity.
no, I think it's.
that was a
pet
change
grooming
in
is
the
that-
office.
okay,
One of the
sorry.
ones that-
R7 and C
I think-
allowed
Yep,
it.
got
No, I
it.
think
It's-
that one does make sense. I can understand the kennels not being there, but that's good. But, you know, certain types of small office rental space.
I think we
I
just
think
want
that
to,
makes sense.
and this is your choice to do as you choose, just a recollection that this is a pretty seismic shift already from what is in the regulations.
But
I
you
know
might as well make-
I know, I just want,
You want
the
it to
feedback
work,
that you're getting
though.
is about a district that happened to previously be industrial. Just a reminder that this is all low scale neighborhoods,
Right.
including Chamberlain neighborhood and Cider Mill and Orchards. Orchards tricky because there aren't collector or arterial roads on through there, but anywhere where there's a collector or arterial, it would be allowed. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of the magnitude.
More about the future neighborhoods. I'm not thinking so much about the existing neighborhoods. It's
What-
more what would the future neighborhoods?
I think there's a difference possibly, Donna, in what is allowed as under these limited conditions and what is allowed in this sort of mini catch-all versus are there other uses that you want to just have permitted? You know, do you want pet grooming to be permitted? You don't need to fold everything that you want in a neighborhood into this use. You can just allow it in the
Yeah,
district.
so
And you could put-
Donna did suggest actually pulling up the table. and
Right, just
seeing
go
if
through
there
the
was
table and
something.
just say, yeah, these probably should be allowed.
I guess we declare though, part of the thing is though that this district is much larger than this one property. Like it extends in some very quiet residential streets too. So I guess we need to consider like the entire, like it's a very large district. So we got to consider in this case.
But it's not it's not the entire district. It's just the portion that is on an arterial road or it's on the corner near an arterial road. That's
It's two different things. There's the arterial street is only this limited neighborhood commercial use. If you allowed pet grooming as a permitted use, it is not restricted to arterial or commercial. It's only if you fold a use into this small use category.
And if you fold into here, it would be a moot point for them anyways, because as we pointed out, that's
They're
10,000
too big.
square foot facility anyhow.
And to be clear, they're not pet grooming. They are a kennel.
Right.
Just
They're
in this one
Yes.
instance, it is a separate category. They have an outdoor exercise yard, which is the biggest difference.
Yeah, it's a bigger use.
And that's one of the big stigma points, right? Is that the noise, the outdoor issues is it's why I'm assuming that's why
Those were
they're
a
separate.
challenge with kennels.
That's why they're two separate categories, the grooming and kennels, correct?
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'd call it I'd put it in the limited neighborhood commercial use. I wouldn't necessarily have them. It would have to be a much more urban neighborhood for it to work. I mean, because see, in my mind, I'm picturing a truly medium scale urban neighborhood. And what would be nice to have if I lived there, what would I like to be able to walk to? Besides cafes, which I don't go to very often, or restaurants, personal instruction facility, yoga studios, that kind of stuff. That's nice to have. But I'm thinking people who have a small apartment would really like to be able to go to a workspace that's close by, particularly since more people are self-employed now. And this is not an allowed use here. And I think it should be. And pet care isn't an allowed use here, which I think it should be. Hair salons, I don't know. I think this is more
Right.
restrictive than it needs to be.
So a framing question for you all, given where you are in the process of, this is the public hearing is, every time that the planning commission makes amendments and the council adopts amendments, what I tell the public is the only thing I can be 100% certain of is that these are not perfect regulations.
Right.
So I think a question for you, big picture, on the commercial side, you decided that you would sort of align the residential types and building types, but that you wouldn't try to tackle consolidating all the different commercial uses because it was just another project beyond what the purpose of Act 47 was. I think a question for you all is, none of these are bad conversations. Are they conversations to be had now with this draft, or to consider in your work plan for a future round of amendments? So
Well-
I'm just going to frame it that way, and that's your call, what you want to do.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is because, 3 people who are very much affected by this decision came here tonight. And I think it would be very nice to give that some consideration to the degree that we can, at least allow for some additional uses that seem reasonable.
I guess the tricky part in this situation, though, it sounds like they're primarily affected by the legislation in 2022. That was a more radical shift for how their law was zoned. That this is actually a pretty minor one in comparison.
Well, no, I think what they're saying is that if they can't find somebody that wants to go through what they went through with his, it's not an appropriate use anymore. But there aren't a whole lot of other uses that they see that they could convert their building into.
Well,
If it's, I think that's what they said. I'm sure that's,
Well,
I know
they
that's
did
what they
say that, but then they hadn't read the table completely. So
right,
there
but
are
when they do
actually-
read the table, it's gonna say no office use. right? It's gonna say no hair salon use. It's gonna, well, I don't know if it'll say no hair salon, probably does allow that. It's gonna say no pet grooming.
I guess I see the argument. This is a somewhat bigger question, I guess, that might be hard to resolve tonight.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. It is hard to resolve it, but I would just like to give them a little bit, a little bit more than what they've got right now.
Maybe we should ask them, what are the kinds of uses that they would like?
Well, we did.
We did ask.
But they didn't say anything.
I was surprised they didn't come back with
Well, I
anything.
think they didn't know because they weren't prepared for that.
I think it's more an issue of what the lot could be converted to should they sell it was their main concern. Like the more uses a lot has, that gives it value. Like with my understanding of their concern, not that they want to convert it, but they were potential buyers, what they might.
Yeah,
what-
well, and
yeah.
I think on the record, we should just encourage them to come back to the city council and say what kind of uses they would propose there.
We did do that.
Yeah. So I guess we can leave it at that.
I guess what we're
Well,
talking. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I know the council's expectation is that you guys vet and give your recommendations. So I guess I would say they're welcome to come to the council, but the council's expectation normally is that you vetted what you want to do. And that they'll say, did you provide your comments to the planning commission? What did the commission decide? They generally, they prefer that you all come in with your recommendation and somebody else can provide additional feedback, but just to.
Yeah, and I think in general, we have done that. I think they're in a strange situation where they didn't realize that their property got changed from an industrial district to a residential district. So what we have done is look at the residential districts that we consolidated and said, do these uses make sense? Are we continuing to have similar and mostly the same uses in each of these districts with a few changes here and there? And like Kelsey said, there's actually only 3 uses that are different.
And one of them was pet grooming.
Yeah, and one of them is pet grooming, which is actually not the category they're in.
I know,
So
but we could say, well, you're allowed to do pet grooming.
if you feel like we should say pet grooming is, you can make that recommendation to add.
Just one other thought for you all. A while ago at the beginning of this process, or maybe even before that, you had talked a little bit about the concept of examining the portion of Heinsberg Road south of I-89 holistically as an area, but felt that due to a whole bunch of reasons that it wasn't right yet as a conversation. That came up when the rights came to you. And you decided, there's an interesting conversation to be had as a holistically looking at this area, but not yet. That might be, this property is in that same area. So just as a thought of a future thing to look at, and there are other affected properties. in the area.
Can I add something? Because I forgot to do this when we were looking at CCRPC study plans. But Bike and Ped is also very interested in looking at this area to not only is for zoning, but also for reduction in roadway speed. What changes to the actual roadway can happen to slow traffic down in that area, because it's becoming a more dense residential area with commercial, lots of cross streets and everything, and yet the speed limit is still very high. So I would say, yes, we should prioritize that as a CCRPC study for this coming year. How can that look? What would that look like as a very different kind of a roadway and surrounding parcels.
I guess just to make concrete a potential response, I guess I think of is, I do think that it sounds like there is some potential interest, and I'm definitely amenable with the idea of at some point revisiting exactly what the allowed uses on limited neighborhood commercial are. Though I guess I don't think we have time for that right now, but that might be my response. I don't know what other people think, but I see what you say, that perhaps that list of 4 items maybe is a little short. There's a old grandfather hair salon in South End over in Burlington, like kind of near the fire station. It's kind of tucked away in there, and it blends nice in the neighborhood. I don't know. I think this is perhaps a future conversation that I would be interested in having. But of course, I know we have plenty of other things that are most important to work on.
Jessica?
If we added pet
Oh,
grooming,
Ryan's trying to say something here.
We're really trying to have a commission conversation, if that's acceptable.
yes,
That was how we laid out the meeting.
if we added pet grooming as in allowed use, would their non-conforming become conforming all of a sudden?
Because they're a kennel. They're not a pet grooming.
They could do pet grooming as well.
Well, yes, kennel includes pet grooming, but it is not limited to.
So how would we bring them into conformance?
You would have to allow dog daycare or commercial kennel.
Need to do that because they're already permitted as an existing use.
I guess one of the other uses that came up was about the congregate care in the C1LR. I saw a lot of head nodding when that came up. We got one of the letters about that. It's just based on the head nodding I saw at the time. With a straw poll, are people in favor of adding congregate care use to the C1LR?
He said
that what it
senior housing or congregate.
And just for context, that's the area around Kennedy and Kimball. It's right in that.
Okay, on favor,
But
straw.
is this only applying to this one area?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Make it as a motion.
Okay, do it.
I move that the request from O'Brien Brothers to include senior housing or congregate housing in the C1LR district on the corner of Kennedy and Kimball. The request be granted.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, on favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Unanimous. Other items? Keith Epstein, one of the ones in the packet, suggested a change that seems like it was pretty much in line with the code.
The
I was-
Energy Committee did talk about this last week.
Okay,
Following his comment, and my understanding of the discussion was that following that they were satisfied with as it's drafted, that it's not a essentially loophole that as Keith was concerned
Okay.
it was.
great. So no,
Um,
no change
So
necessary.
that's my understanding, is that they and he no longer felt a need for it. But we did not formally hear from him since, so I'm just relaying my understanding of the discussion.
Okay. Um, Other items from what we heard or what people had picked up on their own.
Sandy Dooley's point about, about it not being enticing enough for contractors to build affordable housing under the regulations we've adopted. I mean, nobody really, does she know that that's the state regulation that this is based on?
So what she was raising is that there are parts of our inclusionary zoning that match the state, and there's parts that go above the state. But the state doesn't actually tell us what the limits are and how we go above the state. So for example, the state is an optional program, first of all. Ours is mandatory. It is only required, it is 5 units or 20%, whichever is greater. So it doesn't apply to effectively to small buildings or developments in the same way. The city is requiring 10% at 10 units and a different structure at lower numbers of units. Her and then the city also gives an additional bonus on top of what the state grants if you do double what the state requires to get their optional bonus. So what her suggestion was is currently we say you have to do double what the state asks for to get that additional floor. She was saying only require a third more than what the state requires. So she was recommending bringing the that sort of next jump down so that developers get more benefit from doing a little bit more instead of having to do a lot more to get the benefit, the second benefit.
But let me just add one quick thing to it. One other thing that she stated was that today, if you do say 60 units, you get X number of additional units as a bonus. Because in the large scale buildings, you have eliminated density altogether, there is no cap anymore. So there's not a bonus of units because you can build unlimited in theory. So what the regulations give instead is this one floor and an additional floor. And also, as you did in the form-based code a few years ago, you've eliminated density altogether, which is a bonus across the board for everybody. So just as context, she framed it as being this one bonus. I wanted to be clear that there is this second important one, which is large scale building density is gone.
So they don't need those sort of bonus units because there is no cap.
So just to repeat that, so I understand this correctly, the what we're proposing is in addition to our existing program, the state program is in addition to that.
The state gives one floor.
Yep.
Above whatever your local regulation is. So let's say on Shelburne Road, we allow 5, so the state allows 6.
Yep.
The added here for if you do double as much affordable is a 7th story.
Okay.
So if you go to 40% affordable, you get a 7th story.
Yeah.
So, I think Sandy's feedback was, maybe you shouldn't have to do an entire other 20% to get your 7th story.
I guess Sandy's concern though sound like is her understanding was that there is less bonuses than there was before. Is that correct? Or is it more that our existing program was moved anyways because there's unlimited density?
Yeah, so it's a combination of those two things.
Yeah.
The existing program had numbers that don't line up with the state optional program. So it was like a threshold at 12 units instead of 10 units, things like that. So we matched some of those numerical thresholds, but we made our entire program mandatory. So if you are above, if you create more than 10 units, you have to do inclusionary. But if you hit the state definition of an affordable housing development, you get those state granted extra floor and 40% density bonuses.
And ours was mandatory previously.
And ours was mandatory previously. So it actually dropped the threshold from 12 to 10, changed some of the breakdown of the percentages that are required sort of through the system. But the backdrop, long story, the backdrop to all of this is we have reduced the lot size that a small multifamily or a medium multifamily is required to be on. So you're already allowed to be on a smaller amount of land than you were before. And there's no cap on the number for a large, so it's 13 units or more, multifamily building. So it's sort of two different pieces that we see as working together. Technically, yes, you don't get kind of this 1-for-1 bonus, because you don't need to, because there's unlimited in the large buildings. And also the smaller buildings, as we've discussed a little bit before, the minimum lot sizes are low enough that you can functionally put a medium multifamily building on almost any lot that will support that size of building. So it removes some of those artificial dimensional standards. Well, not artificial, but removes some of those dimensional standards that artificially capped the units by allowing more buildings to be built on the same amount of land. And then also there is no cap on the number of units if you can fit the size building on a property. So it removes an artificial cap on, it actually encourages more smaller units than we had previously. Because if you could build a certain size building and you can only fit 40 units in it, you were going to build 40 large units that are not affordable. Where when you remove the cap and you don't say it has to be a limit of 40 and you can put 80 in instead, or some, you know, somewhere in between, you can add in more units and those are naturally affordable, which is sort of a different thing than the required perpetually affordable.
Yeah.
It's encouraging more naturally affordable units and doesn't make a lot of difference to the permanently affordable units.
And again, we don't have density limits for these high density areas anyways.
They're removed. They
Yeah.
exist today, but the
draft removes them.
will.
The draft removed them. So
Right.
everyone is now only concerned by geometry. So the program, even if we kept it forward, wouldn't actually do anything because everyone got infinite bonuses.
I guess
effectively.
the only difference is if someone decided to do a whole series of 12-plex buildings, because there is a minimum lot size for a 12-plex, but it's only 9,000 square feet. So it's effectively as the smallest
Yeah,
lot
12
you
plex
could
on
fit
a
a 12.
9,000 is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
pushing it.
while technically there is a minimum lot size, it is so low for a 12-plex to make no difference.
Yeah, but it's stuff like setbacks and height requirements that are based on governing.
And our other requirements for civic space and stormwater and all those other things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sandy, do you want to clarify your comments? I know we just kind of restated some of them.
Well,
Did you have a?
I do not dispute that there's a benefit to eliminating density limits, but my point is we should have an incentive for developers of market rate housing to go above what's required, a meaningful one. And I don't believe what you have is meaningful because the standard is too high. And it's very compared to what we have now. I mean, it's fine. It's more units now. That's out the window, but there should be some meaningful incentive. And the extra floor is what you're proposing, which is fine, but it's just that you have to do 40% instead of 20% to get that. I mean, we not only need, and the other thing is permanently affordable housing is different from naturally affordable housing. And there's always, at least in the Affordable Housing Committee, a very strong emphasis on the need to have permanently affordable, perpetually affordable housing units.
Thanks.
So all my concern was the discussion was on not what I was trying to focus on.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, thank you. Thoughts on that?
I mean, is this whole having to exceed the state requirement, which is 20%, doubling it? Is that state legislation there, or that's what we're adding?
No, the city is going above what the state is mandating, and there's nothing, the state has nothing that says like, if you provide additional bonuses, it must be this other structure. No, the state is not telling us what we have to do if we go above what the state requires. The only other thing I wanted to add is that the bonus structure of an additional floor is one option, and changing that percentage for getting one additional floor versus getting 2 additional floors is an option. The other thing, there are other things that incentivize affordable housing at different thresholds that are not necessarily a floor. Like we've tossed out many examples in the past about sort of variation from different standards, fee waivers, other things. There's going to be, and I mean, commission willing, I would love for there to be an ongoing conversation about how to incentivize more permanently affordable housing. This is how we're complying with the changes in state statute and going a little bit above for now, with the idea that when we're dealing with a lot of things in a short amount of time, that then putting in something that works to an extent for now and matches the state structure is really the goal. And then having a much larger conversation about what standards can we vary, what permitting fees, what impact fees, like what other things can we do to encourage more permanently affordable, like deeded affordable housing is a much bigger conversation. So it's sort of like what we were talking about before. There's the things that need to happen in this amendment to comply with state statute that partially, at least most of it went into effect over a year ago. And then there are things that we can continue to build on and we can continue to look at as we move forward.
Yeah.
I guess just clarifying that this is not like a finished, complete, well polished.
Oh, absolutely,
stone.
absolutely agree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am receptive to Sandy's argument that if we're gonna do this whole like additional above the state thing, that 40%, my intuition tells me that I do wonder how many projects would actually comply with that. Like I'm personally like, yeah, I know this is part of a larger conversation and more things, but just bumping that down to 30%, I can't immediately see that strikes me as a net positive and just, just changing one digit. But I'm curious to see what other people think.
We did get feedback and recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee. So we actually do have a committee, which I know Sandy's been involved with in the past. I guess I would want to, I don't know. Be nice to hear from them before we make additional changes to this part, just because they really had their head in it and gave recommendations that I think we use.
So as a quick point of clarification, because I also staff the Affordable Housing Committee, the committee recommended to have bonuses for additional, so not just have the mandatory program, but to have further incentives above the mandatory program. That committee has been having some trouble getting a quorum for a little while, so they actually haven't met effectively since March. They may sort of met. April was 2 events. It wasn't an actual meeting. So then that is something that they didn't provide any specific recommendation on this bonus structure. That is something we can certainly go back to them with as we move forward, and we would absolutely do that. So that's the only thing I wanted to say about that. The only other thing is I would agree that yes, it's just changing one digit. There's nothing that changes in the structure of the program that mucks up anything else. The only other implication is that currently you have a combined maximum for use of inclusionary zoning and TDRs of 7 floors. So if you make it easy, this is just pointing out, implications in other parts of the regulations. If you make it easier to get that second bonus floor, you will have fewer TDRs purchased, likely.
That's the transfer development rights, correct?
Yes.
I see.
Yeah. So currently your maximum is 7 stories in most of these areas. It would be 7 stories for combined inclusionary and TDRs. So the structure as it's currently written, most large developments would get that 6th story through inclusionary zoning. And if they wanted to go to 7, they would have to buy TDRs, and they would probably buy between 10 and 20 TDRs to get an additional floor on these larger buildings. So this is just sort of supply and demand situation where if you lower the number of inclusionary units required to get that 7th floor, it'll become easier to do that instead of buy TDRs. So it's just a balancing act that the commission has to decide on, like encouraging more permanently affordable units versus not selling the TDRs and having the permanent conservation that comes from the other end of that system. So it's just a balance there.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I think having a constant TDR, I guess that makes me want to go back to saying, yeah, keep it at 40 for now, but maybe add that to maybe because I guess I want to better understand how the TDRs interact with this.
Yep. So that's up to the commission to do whatever you'd like on that. It's just you have 2 tools that are capped by the same maximum. So if you make it easier to use one, then it makes it less likely that people will use the other. So that's just the policy decision of the commission.
Is bumping up to 8 in the tape cards, or is that way?
What was that?
Bumping up to 8 stories maximum? Is that?
That's a different conversation,
yeah.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul, you want to go ahead?
Hmm?
You were trying to get my attention?
I just wondered if we were ready for a motion.
Oh. don't know, I think there were maybe a few things in the packet maybe we needed to address, or the legal.
So quick, where did you all land straw poll wise on the 40% versus 30% that Colin suggested on the inclusionary bonus floor, the sort of second bonus?
No change to the draft is where we,
I think we should consider that 30%, yes.
you think we should?
Otherwise,
What
seems
about
like-
that TDR balancing thing?
you know, one's more important than the other. Housing is more important.
Well, don't you get housing either way?
You do.
I mean, it's sort of at this point, I might made this oversimplification. We're kind of pitching affordable housing units against conservation here. Like we're getting the same units either way. It's just the question is, are we conserving other areas of the city versus adding more affordable housing units? Yes. I mean, my gut wants to go with prioritizing inclusionary zoning, but I also want to a bit better understand the TDR program is maybe where my thoughts currently are, because I don't want to make this decision without having all the information.
I mean, there's still, we did try to expand the market for TDRs, and we did. But if this is a major issue, 40% is quite a hardship, I would guess.
Yeah, no, I think no, I think we're more or less mostly in agreement about that. I think, yeah.
Did Sandy recommend a reduction of that to 30%?
She did.
I think hers was more generous than the 30% in her suggestion.
It was to only require 33% more than the requirement. So 33% of 20%.
Instead of 40.
Another
So
step.
it's still a reasonable balance. We might lose some TDR sales and therefore the associated conservation, but I don't want to make it that difficult for developers to. She mentioned incentivizing them.
Because I guess it is true that if you are making it less likely that people are going to use the TDRs, but you overall are increasing the incentives for more units on the whole. Because you're actually, because we're not actually reducing the TDR program, we're just making another program that's even more appealing potentially, is my understanding of this.
Correct.
And I guess lowering that threshold is ultimately, yeah, you are right. I agree with you. It is overall putting more emphasis on housing. So
And
it's not zero. I guess it's not a zero sum game. I guess it's one loses, one gains, but overall there's more.
Yeah.
Overall, there's more incentive structures, a stronger incentive structure to build more units is my understanding of this. If we were to lower the threshold from 40%,
33.
I would request
love a
round numbers if you
numbers,
do it.
please. Just our development review team would truly appreciate a round number.
And what was the round number?
Colin had floated 30%.
it's currently at 20. So
It's
the state is at
The
20.
state requirement is 20, so requiring 30 is effectively requiring 50% more.
Not required, giving an option.
Giving the optional,
Giving-
to get the optional bonus, double bonus floor would require 30%.
So 10 additional instead of 20 additional is Colin's suggestion percent.
Yes.
Okay, somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make the motion. I move to approve draft amendments to the land development regulations.
No, not that motion.
No? Oh,
No, they're still talking about, okay, we can do that motion if you want.
I would like to, yeah.
Go right ahead. Okay,
Either that or
if
send out
somebody
for
wants
pizza,
to
you
get
know,
a
something.
different motion before Paul makes that motion, you better go quick.
I could move that the 40% currently required to get the additional
Lower.
floor or additional bonus be reduced to 30%.
I second.
Okay, any discussion? On favor? Okay, I'm not voting for it. So
So what is your
it
vote?
was a nay.
Okay, so 4-1, Jessica.
Yeah,
ma'am.
so it's still.
And Paul, you
passes.
voted yay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. Okay, anything else? Paul was ready to move on to a full pass on to the city council, I believe.
So
I think there may be some legal items.
So the biggest legal item is actually the removal of alternative compliance from, it was a bit of a question of standards and does it comply with current case law about predictability for applicants. We, on the planning staff side, don't think that there's a huge amount of immediate implication of removing that option. There was still a standard for modification and waiver from standards in subdivision. It's just this alternative compliance that was structured as doing a different thing that meets the same purpose, kind of generally. The way we've left it with legal is their recommendation would be to remove alternative compliance as an option, but to keep that dialogue open for how we can be nimble and in certain ways with modification and stay within the bounds of where our state Supreme Court has landed on such things.
And just to be clear, it's statutes specifically enable waivers. They don't specifically enable alternative compliance except in planned unit development. So that was sort of the.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we are agreeing with that suggestion. Eliminate.
Well, that's our question. You have to answer it.
They check with legal.
Right, so that legal's recommendation and staff's recommendation is to remove the alternative compliance and only use the waivers. It is now your decision because they are the advice people, not the
Oh, yeah.
decision.
Okay, well, let's do that.
Yeah, if staff and legal recommend
Yeah.
it. I'm
Yeah.
willing to defer to the expert on
Okay,
that.
can we just do a straw poll on that one to comply with the legal recommendation?
Yep.
All in favor of the straw poll?
I'm not sure I really understand the issue.
Straw poll, okay.
Yep.
I don't know if I really understand.
Are you- do you need-
to vote on?
Right, so just to add a little bit to Kelsey's, in site plan and in subdivision, there are the rules. And then the DRB in the draft has a couple of tools at their disposal to adjust the rules. One of them is in a guided manner to waive a standard. So the standard might be,
Your house has to be yellow. And
although
you
it's
waive it.
conventional mostly, right?
Well, I'm just as a sort of
Yeah.
semi-absurd example.
Or, often on Shelburne Road, the standard says 20-foot setback. They have the ability to reduce it to 18 feet on a given circumstance. That's a modification. A waiver would be an elimination of that down to 0 feet altogether, that you don't have to do it at all. You don't have to have any setback. An alternative compliance is more of a different way of meeting an objective.
An example that we've tossed around and I've tossed around with development review staff is, this isn't true, but it says that you have to have a separated bike lane, a separated bike path, a shared use path. But the specific property in question, with the road connecting it to the neighboring property, a private street, has a bike lane and a sidewalk. And the next property says, well, it would be silly for us to have a separated shared use path that goes to nowhere that doesn't match up with this sidewalk and bike lane. So an alternative compliance for safe passage for cyclists and pedestrians, instead of being a shared use path, the DRB could allow them to do the sidewalk and the bike lane in that specific instance where it matches up with neighboring infrastructure. So you're reaching the same purpose, but you're doing it in a different way. So if nothing's being technically waived, you're just doing it. You're reaching the same ends differently.
And legal is saying they don't.
They're saying that there is likely and not enough standards for applicants to be able to tell if what they're proposing will or will not be acceptable. It's sort of too vague, too broad, too like, well, as drafted, just propose a thing and we'll see how it shakes out. That's not legally acceptable in Vermont. You need to have more predictability in your development regulations. So as drafted, with the timeline, with everything else in the package of amendments, the recommendation was to take it out for now, have a further discussion with legal and with all of you about how to put similar types of modification or allow for similar things back in with additional standards and with more guidance to applicants that better threads the needle in state law,
Right, but not to do it in a,
not to do it in a rushed way.
in a rushed way.
And in the interim, we just kind of let the DRB kind of figure it out with waivers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
So you had a straw poll that started to get everybody there.
Yeah.
And then Donna
Okay,
asked to,
Considered.
let's redo the straw poll. Aye. Okay, good. We'll do that.
So sure, yeah.
That's very helpful.
Oh, I'm glad.
Other legal items?
In there, they caught a couple of inconsistencies and typos that are in the red line, but I didn't call out specifically because they were kind of non-issues. I separated the memo into two sections. One is kind of necessary updates for internal consistency and compliance with state statute and city policies. It would be great to know if there was anything in that section of the memo that anyone had questions about, was concerned about, mostly if you were concerned about it and wanted it removed. Those are all things that are reflected in the red line. Because it was kind of a fairly clear position.
So that's on page 2, 3, and 4 of the packet
Yes.
there.
Yep.
And in the red line.
Yep.
Any concern with those items? Okay, then the second section was for additional discussion, and these are not in the red line, is that, or?
Correct.
Just
For
to be
the
clear.
they're for the most part are not in the red line because they're otherwise explained in this document. Like, for example, you already dealt with the small residential building types, the lot sizes, there's a red line, but it's shown in this memo instead of in the document itself.
So we did A. B was about veterinary hospital outdoor exercise areas.
Yeah, so let me correct what I just said. Some of this is in the red line.
This one's in the red line.
This one is in
Okay.
the red line. As I noted in Article 2, there's an update to the definition. And then in 1411J, there's a further clarification on outdoor exercise areas for veterinary hospitals and limits their size.
Okay.
And intended design for a single animal at a time, not for like a play yard.
And then C, was this one in there? Or do we need?
Oh, sorry. And that veterinary hospitals would also require it's responsive to the request that was made back in April or early May. We would also recommend that a veterinary hospital, not a commercial kennel, not a pet daycare, all these other things, the veterinary hospital with its limited outdoor use be allowed in the form-based code area, which is effectively city center plus a little bit.
We did talk about that.
Yeah.
Before.
that was your direction before, it just never got caught into a draft before now.
Right.
Yeah, there was something in the form-based code about allowing for convalescing animals.
So there is an update in the definition of veterinary hospital that there can be animals there overnight, but only in relation to medical treatment. So convalescence from medical treatment, you have a small surgery, you have to stay overnight.
Convalescing animals overnight could be howling and barking. I've seen it and heard it. I
So
don't think,
that's up to the commission about, I guess,
think that's a great thing to allow.
They would be outside though. So presumably you have soundproofing.
Well,
my understanding from we did a little bit of outreach on veterinary hospitals and what they require to operate as a veterinary hospital. Overnight boarding of animals for medical reasons is something that cannot be separated, is my understanding, from medical treatment for animals.
Outdoors.
And they don't, it's just pet relief, that my understanding, you go out, pee, come back. So if you're concerned, right, if you're concerned about that indoor noise for overnight animals in the form-based code area, you would have to not allow veterinary hospitals in form-based code.
okay. I'll think on it.
Okay, then C, minimum lot size, non-residential This one.
Yep, so this is in the C2 red line where we split the all other uses for as a building type in residential districts versus in commercial districts. And in commercial districts, setting the minimum lot size to 0, which would be consistent with the large multifamily and makes regulating things like a larger, reasonably large, not terribly large, mixed use building a lot more simple. Like if you suddenly have a minimum lot size for a commercial use inside a build that's on the first floor of a building that doesn't have a minimum lot size, then things get complicated, and that's not what we intended for these commercial corridors. So this would only be in the high scale mixed use area, so it's a more or less Shelburne Road. Yeah.
Okay, the next one was about PUDs optional. We actually did get a comment on this one. It's the T&Ds are currently required over 10 acres, but this would be to shift it to optional.
So this is something that we had flagged for you back in June, and you had said, please come back with an analysis and some recommendations. And so we looked at it, as we mentioned earlier, there are about 11 properties total that have more than 10 acres of developable land in a residentially enabled district. Of those, 2 of them have less than 10 contiguous acres. So it would be very hard to do an actual traditional neighborhood. So it's really down to 9 that fall into that category. And most of those are between 10 and 15 acres. There are 2 properties that have more than 15 developable acres. One of them is 835 Heinsberg Road. The other one is the Allenwood Estate. The Allenwood Estate previously was enabled to be either or both of a traditional neighborhood and a conservation PUD. The 835 Heinsberg Road was required to be a TND. As drafted, everything is required to be a TND, and so any development on either of those parcels and the other 7, the other 9, would be required to either build nothing or a TND to its completeness. The other component that we got some feedback on in one of the listening sessions was that in the last couple of years, in where costs have gone, infrastructure costs have gone up substantially. And so while that may not necessarily be a problem at a larger scale traditional neighborhood, at the 10-acre size, there are inefficiencies built in of potentially having to do sort of a ring road around it, which may have become less feasible in the last 3 years than they were before. And certainly the number of properties, as I noted in the memo, that were applicable when you started this project back in 2016 is substantially changed. The city's changed a lot. We look to see, how does a traditional neighborhood differ from just your standard subdivision regulations now, because you've been increasing a lot of the requirements in the standard subdivisions. And the most significant thing that we saw as a difference was that the traditional neighborhood and also the conservation PUD, incidentally, had a minimum density, which is not a requirement of standard subdivision today. And also, as I think Sandy Dooley had mentioned earlier, there is a stronger requirement for a mix of dwelling unit types. In most other ways, the traditional neighborhood and your subdivision regulations have become much, much closer. The biggest place where they became way closer than they used to be was what you just talked about with the lot sizes. Act 47 sort of flipped it on its head, whereas it used to be that you had, 9,000-10,000 square foot lots, but in a traditional neighborhood, you could do 5,000 square foot lots. Now that's enabled, period. So the difference between the mandated TND and just a standard subdivision of what you could do is now kind of here. looking at the fact pattern, looking at the circumstances of these, 7 or 8, 9 properties that are applicable, looking that are sort of marginally sized TNDs, and then considering the 2 remaining ones of, is it the planning commission's objective to require the full development of the entire Allenwood property? And if, if the commission were to say, well, what if we made it 20 acres instead of 10, then you're down to 1 parcel, which could look a lot like spot zoning. So, or opens questions.
Problematic.
And so our recommendation, and this is entirely up to you, was to make the traditional neighborhood optional and to create the carve out of 2 acres that you already spoke about, and to establish a minimum density of, what did we say?
You said no minimum density.
No, to establish one. There isn't one currently in subdivision, but to establish one of,
We had in the memo, there was an option for, to more closely mimic the TND, you would have 2 minimum densities, one that was 8 for 50% of your property and one that was 4 for the other 50% of your property. Or you could just do 6 across the board or some other number in between those things. We recommended having a kind of a neighborhood core that's a denser thing, that's the 8 units an acre. And just as clarification, again, this is planned density. You could have a situation where someone decides not to build all of the things. We can't force someone to build all of the things, but there has to remain space for the density as planned.
So as drafted as our recommendation was that if you have between 2 and 4 buildable acres, it's 4 units an acre.
Mhm.
Above 4 buildable acres, it would be 50% has to be at least 4 units an acre, 50% has to be at least 8 units an acre. And that sort of mimics the TND. So that's the recommendation.
Here you go.
The world is your oyster. To discuss tonight or
to continue
because it's 9:53.
And you pick out a couple of the positives on the TND that might be lost if somebody opts not to.
Yeah, currently, which is something that we can correct in the future, the TND has there's a cottage court building type that's allowed. That is something that we didn't get a chance to address in this draft in a sort of citywide way. We could in the future, but that is currently a difference. Another is the civic space requirement in a TND is 15%. In a regular major subdivision, it is 10%. So it does reduce that civic space requirement a little bit. The TND has more strict housing mix requirements. Major subdivision does have a housing mix requirement, built by building type or by number of bedrooms in units. But it is not to the same sort of prescriptive level as the TND. It is mostly things that the TND prescribes something much more specific, a breakdown that's more specific, and then the major subdivision does a lot of that, but in a more general way.
The TND requires at least 5% of the developable area to be something non-residential.
Yep.
However, your discussion of the limited neighborhood residential opens up as an option more than ever existed before to do that. It's just not a requirement anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that there are some smaller design features associated with, how a building faces a lot. The TND forces more alley design.
Yes.
Than the subdivision, though both have the residential design standards that talk about the maximum amount of garage space in the street.
Yep.
Civic space is the same?
Civic space is 15% in TND and 10% in major subdivision. So it is a reduction.
So I just want to make sure I understand this all correctly. So currently the TNDs are required on these
for a certain size property.
Over 10 acres, right? What was the justification originally for requiring it, and why are we now changing it to
right? So just a minor clarification. On a property of more than 4 acres and then 10 acres to, for different applicability, a planned unit development was mandatory.
Okay,
In some districts, the only available planned unit development was a TND. In some districts, it was a TND or a conservation planned unit development, which was a different type of PUD where you conserved the bulk of the land and built on a small portion.
okay. So
Due to
existing,
all of,
everything over 4 acres is the existing requirement.
yes,
One of those two, or in some of them, one,
Yeah.
in other ones, one of the two for every
Yeah.
over 4 acres.
because of what happened with Act 47 and the minimum densities granted, the conservation PUD really couldn't work anymore in that way. And so that is proposed to be eliminated in its entirety.
Okay,
The result is that areas, parcels that were required to be a TND, that doesn't change too much, but the ones that had the choice of being a TND or a conservation PUD have lost one of the options now. So we are, you've now in the draft mandated that it apply to more properties than it did before.
I see. And in these examples, that is a pretty significant difference.
It's a fairly significant difference.
Mhm.
And actually in some cases previously, the mandate was for a conservation PUD. And now with that eliminated, it is still mandated to be a PUD, so it kicks it over to being mandated to be a TND. So properties like right?
Mhm.
So like properties like the Long property would fall now into being mandated to be a TND when they previously could have been a conservation PUD or a TND. So in the southeast quadrant, that was most of the southeast quadrant mandated a conservation PUD. That's gone. It defaults now, barring other action of yours, to being mandating a TND because the planned unit development is still mandated. Does that make sense?
I see.
I know I just said a lot of the same 3 letters.
So what was what's the reason for putting back the minimum density? I know we have, you have to allow at least 5.
Right. You don't have to. We were trying to look to see for these properties, you had previously back in 2022 found that it was important that they have certain characteristics that they built, with the exception of the carve out of less than 2 acres, that they be designed to be built with a certain amount. If you chose to not require the TND and eliminated the minimum density, then these parcels could conceivably be built as estate lots. 2 acre lots each across,
Or 1 acre lots.
1 acre lots across, an entire subdivision. And
With the house in the middle.
that becomes quite different from a TND. So in our recommendation, we were trying to, how do we mimic as close to a TND without some of the onerous components, I guess is what our recommendation was.
Is there such a thing? Is there such an option as like just kind of creating one that's the best of both worlds? That could be universal, because, we're not talking, unless one or the other has a tremendous benefit on certain kinds of property.
One or the
whereas
other which.
Well, either a TND or a major subdivision. If one or the other had a real benefit for a certain property that was obvious, then you'd keep both. But is that the case?
Wasn't the recommendation to make TND optional, so you still could do either?
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I guess the question is, is it more just a personal the developer's preference, or is it something about the property itself that, would lend itself to one or the other? You mentioned the larger properties lend themselves to the TNDs.
And the squarer properties.
And the squarer properties, yeah.
Right,
whereas
and
the
I might say it in the
subdivision-
inverse to say that the less square, smaller properties lend themselves less well to a TND.
Right.
So I think that's the way we looked at it from the which ones lend themselves less well.
Mhm.
Conceivably, there's nothing, if somebody philosophically wanted to do a TND, you could do it through a major subdivision. If you are philosophically aligned that way, the thing that you would get as a developer for being a TND is you would get the benefit in your DRB process of fewer variables. So those who may not agree with your vision, you'd say, I'm a TND. I'm only allowed, it's a tighter box, which is has some challenges, but also has the benefit of a developer is guaranteed that tighter box. So it's a good thing for developers too, if they want to do it.
I'm pretty swayed by the staff recommendation here, at least myself.
Optional, seems reasonable.
Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, do we want to do a straw poll to go with the staff recommendation of optional?
So we need to decide whether we want to do the 2-tiered 8 versus 4 versus.
You can
everything
also
6.
discuss that, yeah.
It's a separate,
That's separate, separate.
okay, straw poll in favor of optional? Right. Okay, so the next one was the minimum plan density, which is item II for subdivision over 2 acres, which was just explained.
Yep.
We want to look at it separately. Thoughts on this to be a little closer to the existing PUD program?
Thank you.
When adopting the PUDs, there was a lot of discussion about how this required minimum density was kind of a big part of it to get the walkability, the efficient use of land, justify the infrastructure investment.
Just the only thing I would add to it is we thought a lot about this. Is 8 too high? Is that too much of an expectation? And then we came back to a reminder that under the standards that you just agreed to, a fourplex can be on 5,000 square feet. So you could achieve 8 units an acre with
You can actually achieve 8 units, yeah.
much. It is that's not a very high bar, considering that a fourplex can be on the same size lot as a single unit building, or single family homes at
On 5,000 square foot lots.
on 5,000 square foot lots. And that's only for half of the project. So that was our thinking, was that 8, it is both consistent with the TND. It initially felt a little bit, we were sort of doing a gut check on, is this too high? But it does match pretty nicely with the other standards.
And just as a reminder, like, it doesn't actually have to be built. It has to be planned for, and the space needs to be reserved. So you can't have your 1 acre lot with your house in the middle so there's no way to build around it and subdivide in the future, but you could build your smaller house in the corner.
But so when they do build it though, so it's basically like they have to, for stuff they do build, it has to comply with this, but there still needs to be space for future development if they were to ever want. So am I ever saying this is essentially trying to preserve their ability to infill, or am I?
It's sort of both. The intention is that when you build at a density that either currently builds the density this way or reserves the space for future density to be built that way.
So hypothetically, if they were to develop half their area at 4 units per acre, and then they could say, oh, one day we'll develop the rest and it'll all be at 8, is that like something that
they would have to show, you'd have to show in your subdivision plan how you would plan to do that.
But you don't have to do that.
Correct.
Just need to make sure, you need to prove
You need to show you need to subdivide the land in a way that shows that you can achieve that density.
This is only for PUDs?
No, this is subdivision. This is a replacement for this. This is effectively a replacement for the standard that was only in PUDs and putting it into all subdivisions because of the way that the PUD program has been reduced.
Yeah, no, I like the second piece there where between 2 and 4 acres, just have the minimum density of 4 units per acre, and you don't get up into that 8 units per acre.
Correct.
This is more consistent with the current draft, I think. for the
That's what-
small.
yeah. What's confusing is because, we talk about lot size everywhere else and then we get back into units per acre here. If that had the potential to be kind of confusing.
I hear where you're coming from. The idea was that if you just say minimum lots, if you go with just the minimum lot sizes, you're just doing those minimum lot sizes. The intention here is that it's because you're sort of averaging over a larger area. So you could put a fourplex and a single family home or three single family homes and then a duplex and then something else. As long as that contiguous area, that's 50% of your property, meets that density requirement. So it allows for more mix without fully prescribing exactly what that mix needs to be.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, straw poll on including this language as shown. Aye.
Wait, oh, sorry, ma'am, just hang on. So minimum. Okay, so we're doing the 8 and 4, not the 6.
Yes.
Okay.
8 and 4 if it's more than 4.
Okay.
8 and 4.
Variety.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Okay, good. So the one remaining item in our packet was about the multiple principal buildings on the lot. Does anyone have questions about that one? Okay, I guess we're good with that one.
Okay.
Paul?
Hang on. We have one more
Well, I just-
set before you.
I needed to circle back to master plan exemption for 2 acres. Did you land on 2 acres for that exemption? The previous conversation?
Yeah, I thought we did that already.
Yeah, it was just sort of petered out as a discussion and we circled to other things. As you said, there was some jumping around.
Oh, yeah, we wanted the 2 acres.
Okay. And then before we move on further, is veterinary hospitals allow it? There's 2 pieces to it. There's the changes in the definitions that are the definition and the how outdoor exercise areas are regulated that are in the draft. There's that piece, and which is part of the separating the veterinary hospitals from dog daycares and other things. The second part of the piece is, I think what Michael was raising is, do you want to allow that as a use in the form-based code? Yes?
No one,
Just being totally clear.
And we have the
Michael
last
didn't
two
like it.
And we have
then
2
moved on.
surprises.
little ones, I promise. Okay, the first one, we promise this is the end. First one is in the Appendix B, which is your transportation standards, about how you do traffic studies. There was a Supreme Court decision that came down this year. I'm not going to go into detail, but basically it said that it was about traffic impact fees, and the court ruled unanimously that a generalized requirement was not sufficient at the municipal level, that the applicant had to have the right to study something individually, that we couldn't just have, this is the formula, you must always pay it this way. And so currently our transportation standards say that to do a traffic study, if it's in the Institute of Traffic Engineers trip generation study manual, you must use that to calculate the number of trips. That's not really viable any longer. And so we are still recommending that it be used. Hang on. However, we have added one line at the recommendation of our consultant. And screen, keep working with me. The draft that you had in your packet said an applicant may additionally prepare and submit a custom trip generation study at their sole expense. The proposed addition is to give it a little bit of boundaries as to what that needs to be, which is to study it by a licensed engineer, collecting at least 3 local sites, collecting data at 5 more sites is preferable. So that's the recommendation of our traffic consultant.
Just the addition of that last sentence.
Just that last sentence. It's
Okay.
can probably be something that we study further, but as a making sure that we are crossing our Ts and dotting Is at this moment. That's the recommendation.
Okay.
Yes, I perhaps want to revisit at some point because, to be, if you're the one commissioning the study and you have a strong incentive structure to want a low number, like, things can get massaged. I guess we'll make sure there's guardrails to make sure that isn't happening.
Right. And a reminder that the DRB always has the authority to conduct an independent technical review of any study that's done. This is just telling that they should be doing 3 studies so that we're not having an argument of, oh, I did 1 count somewhere and that was sufficient.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And then yours?
Yeah.
Any issues with that? Okay.
No.
The last melon.
Oh, goodness.
So, this is the dimensional table, does not reflect the changes that you made over here earlier. The unfortunately reasonably undistinguishable light red is what was in your packet, and the bolder dark red, which is primarily over here, is what we would additionally recommend to add. These 2 columns reflect the additional maximums. They regulate the increases that you can have using in the state level inclusionary zoning, or TDRs. It puts a little bit more of a guardrail on the TDR table that you've looked at in the past. The other thing, so here you can have 1 additional floor on a small multi or medium multi. And that additional floor can be up to an additional 12 feet above these numbers here. The 25 is for a flat roof. The 28 is for a pitched roof. Down here, we made, previously the numbers were 35 and 40. Here, it didn't make sense for that to be different than the commercial uses for similar reasons, as I stated before about minimum lot size. So now large multi-unit buildings and a non-residential use in a commercial district have the same height, both standard maximum and the bonus maximum.
The big thing, just to be, because I know it's really late, was the regulation said you got another story, but it didn't say anything about feet.
Yeah,
so feet were still there, and so this is trying to say, what is a story? So in the case of the lower part of it, that's 2 14-foot stories, which is what is foot stated elsewhere. 12 feet is assigned for the mediums, and instead of getting 2 floors bonus, you get 1 floor bonus maximum on these low scale buildings, because to have a 4-story 3-plex seems a little excessive. At least as a,
So my understanding is we have to give them the density bonus, but we don't want to have a double density on the lower ones.
it was that yes, and also we had both stories and feet. Let me back this up for 1 second. The heights question in this table is a much bigger project. It is something that we decided a few months ago was sort of too large and a little bit disconnected from the Act 47 H687 stuff, that we chopped it off and said this is the limit, and that will be the next project, or that will be another project. These are the couple of tweaks that need to happen to make our heights table make any sense in the context of those bonus floors that you get for inclusionary zoning under the state law.
So we
So
know it's not a
there's
perfect
a lot of
solution, but it makes it functional.
Yeah, it's not a perfect solution there. We will be coming back to these height numbers in feet versus these numbers in stories that are from different sides of the building. And other things in this table, but this is sort of the way we thought of as a cleanup to really sort of dot the final I's and cross the T's to make the table functional for now, and then we will come back
Make
and
sure the DRB is not stuck with
crossing standards. And the only other related thing is adding, I actually never added times floor in the TDR structure. We talked about it being kind of a Lego block. I never actually added into the Article 19 definition as 2,000 square feet multiplied by a floor. It was just the flat, it was the 2D, not the 3D. So that's the only change in that side.
Issues with the table?
Are we gonna submit it as it is now and then work on it later, or do you want to defer this?
No, we would, I mean, the clean version, we'd clean up the red line version and the clean version, so it'd look better than this, but we would submit to city council now this version that has feet and stories and these extra 2 columns. And then in the next 6 months to a year, this would be a project of the planning commission to more critically look at these heights and make this table make more sense than it currently does.
But it's not a one meeting.
But it's a several meeting conversation, probably.
I move to approve the draft amendments to the land development regulations number RD 24, LDR 2401 through LDR 2410, and to submit them alongside the previously approved planning commission report to the city council.
So quick clarification, there are there are edited reports. So just with the reports as updated.
In other words, with the motions we've made tonight and the straw polls.
Yes. To make sure,
Well, okay, then.
yeah,
as
agreed
amended
upon edits and updated reports.
As amended tonight.
Second.
Was that good enough?
If you could just say, and with updated reports as provided in the packet
And updated following
and
tonight's meeting.
double updated reports.
And double updated and maybe more.
Okay, that's
Okay.
better. Thanks.
Would you second that?
Not quite sure.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think you should read it again. Read it back to us.
The motion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
I didn't write it verbatim.
We're Sue.
I know.
Well, I've got the motion without the amendments here.
So can I take a crack at it for you?
Yep.
That the motion be to approve amendments LDR 2401 through 2010, incorporating all of the amendments presented and agreed upon this evening by straw poll or vote. Further, to amend the planning commission reports on LDR 2401 through 2010 to reflect those changes.
There was some motions as well.
Right, I said, and decided upon this evening. So, and to submit the entire package to the city council.
Is that your motion, Paul?
It's good, yeah.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
All right.
That was unanimous. Wonderful, thanks for hanging in there. We do try to end before now, typically, and can we just adjourn?
You have one very quick 1-minute item.
Okay, the sign thing.
We can skip minutes if you want. Sign package is something that was approved 12 years ago by the planning commission. This is substantially similar, but it has a little more things in it. Under state law, under this billboard law, it is required to be approved by the planning commission and council. This is in order to get the signs to do the bridge over the interstate, Bike Ped Bridge. So it is the same sign package with more detail. You would
Can we
motion to
end the meeting?
No, he's saying he wants us to vote on this other thing.
On the bridge.
I'm okay with signs on a bridge.
So it's the sign package that applies citywide, but it's sort of critical path in this effort to get the Bike Ped Bridge. So
You wanted us to do it tonight.
yes,
Is what-
please.
Oops. Well, I liked the signs before, so I don't.
It's the same sign package. It's just, it was a limited subset before. This is for ones that the pedestrian scale ones essentially to go over the Bike Ped Bridge and elsewhere. So it's the
You-
exact same set of
You like
packages.
them?
Yes,
Okay.
very much a big fan.
I'll make the motion to approve the signs.
Thank you.
Any-
Second.
Okay, on favor?
All right.
Aye.
Good.
Okay, so you can postpone minutes.
We're skipping the minutes. Okay.
Thank
we
you,
are
everyone.
adjourned.
Thank you for everyone online who stuck around.
Nice first meeting.
And
Colin.
good night.
Lots of same discussion I was expecting.
Something that, you know,
Colin, this is the shortest one they had all year.
That's not true.
I'm just kidding.
I was expecting that to be a public hearing, you know, wait. Hey, good discussions.
Thank you, Ryan.